My name is Lauren, 33 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. When I got pregnant in 12th grade, my parents kicked me out into a freezing blizzard with absolutely nothing. 14 years later, they breached my Manhattan penthouse, demanding to meet their grandson to secure a massive inheritance. But what they found waiting for them would financially ruin them forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. Today, I am a highly successful corporate liquidator, handling multi-million-dollar assets for top-tier firms. The jarring ding of my private penthouse elevator, echoing through the grand foyer, was my first warning that something was terribly wrong. I was sitting at my custom marble dining table enjoying my morning black coffee while reviewing financial portfolios. My $4 million apartment overlooking the Manhattan skyline is a fortress of security. I had certainly not given clearance to anyone this early on a weekday. The heavy oak elevator doors slid completely open, and the air in the room seemed to freeze. There they stood, William and Catherine, my parents, the exact same people who had completely erased me from their lives 14 years ago. They stepped aggressively onto the imported hardwood floors of my home, bringing the toxic weight of my past right into my sanctuary. They looked exactly the same as I remembered, just slightly older, and carrying an air of frantic entitlement. There was no hesitation in their steps, no looking around with awe at the floor-to-ceiling windows, no offering a single apology for over a decade of absolute silence. They did not even pretend to be happy to see their daughter. Instead, my mother Catherine crossed her arms tightly over her chest and glared at me with pure disgust. She looked at my simple silk morning robe and then cast a judgmental eye over the expansive, luxurious view of the city. She scoffed loudly, shaking her head with a familiar mocking pity. "I see you are still living exactly how I expected, Lauren. Whose apartment is this anyway? Which rich old man are you leeching off of now to afford a place like this? You always were a parasite looking for an easy way out." I did not say a single word in response. I just took another slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, letting the bitter liquid coat my tongue while I watched them unravel. My father William stepped forward, his face flushed with that familiar, arrogant anger that used to terrify me when I was a teenager. "We do not have time for your pathetic games, Lauren," he barked, pointing a finger at me. "We know you are just squatting here or playing house with some foolish executive who does not know any better. We did not come all the way to the city to catch up or pretend we care about whatever shameful lifestyle you have built for yourself. We came for the boy." Catherine marched right up to the edge of the marble table, invading my personal space, just like she used to do when I was a child. "Bring him out right now," she demanded, her voice sharp and grating, echoing off the high ceilings. "We know he is here. We are not leaving this apartment until we see him." The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the quiet penthouse. 14 years ago, she had called that exact same boy a mistake, a parasite, a permanent stain on her perfect suburban reputation. She had literally thrown my belongings into garbage bags and shoved me out the door because my pregnancy was an inconvenience to her country club lifestyle. Now she was standing in my home, demanding to see him as if she had any legitimate right to his existence. Catherine aggressively reached into her designer handbag, a bag I instantly recognized with my trained eye as being several seasons old and slightly frayed at the leather straps. She pulled out a folded slip of paper and slammed it down onto the marble table right next to my coffee cup. It was a check written out for $10,000. "Take the money and go fetch the boy," she demanded, leaning over the table to intimidate me. "Your grandfather passed away last week. He left a substantial trust fund behind, and the stubborn estate lawyers are refusing to release the funds to us until we provide a physical signature from your bastard son. We need his signature on the probate documents today. Take this $10,000 as payment for your trouble," she continued, her tone dripping with extreme condescension. "It is more money than a girl like you has ever seen in your entire life. Consider it a generous gift from us for being a cooperative little girl. You do not have the brains or the financial discipline to manage the kind of immense wealth your grandfather left behind. We are the rightful guardians of that estate. So take the check, sign the release forms, and bring the boy out here so we can get this over with and be done with you forever." I remained perfectly still in my chair. I did not flinch. I did not yell back or defend my honor. I simply placed my hot coffee cup down on the matching saucer, letting the ceramic clink softly against the stone. I let the absolute silence stretch across the massive room. I let them stand there breathing heavily, waiting nervously for me to react to their hostility. The silence was my weapon establishing dominance over the space they thought they could control. I watched my parents begin to shift uncomfortably under my cold, steady gaze, realizing that their usual tactics of bullying and shouting were completely ineffective against the woman I had become. I finally moved. I slowly reached across the polished marble and picked up the piece of paper Catherine had thrown at me. I held the check up to the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I did not look at the $10,000 amount written in my mother's harsh cursive. Instead, my eyes immediately went to the bottom left corner of the slip. I read the routing and account numbers printed there. My daily corporate liquidation work involves tearing apart financial portfolios, dissecting hidden liabilities, and identifying exactly where desperate people try to hide their insolvency. I know banking codes better than I know my own reflection. A genuine smile finally broke across my face, but it contained absolutely no warmth. "This is a very interesting gesture," I said, my voice low and perfectly controlled. "You are offering me $10,000 to simply walk into the next room and fetch my son. But this is not a personal checking account, Catherine." I tapped my manicured fingernail directly against the routing number. "This specific prefix belongs to a high-interest, unsecured line of credit from a secondary lending institution. You did not write this check from your savings. You took out a cash advance at a 24% interest rate just to come here and bribe me. You are borrowing money you do not actually have to pay off a daughter you threw away, all so you can access a trust fund you desperately need to stay afloat." William stepped forward again, his chest puffing out in a pathetic display of authority. "That is none of your business," he snapped, though his voice wavered slightly at my accurate financial assessment. "We manage our assets just fine. You just need to take the money and do what you are told." I set the check back down on the table, smoothing out the crease with deliberate care. "Your assets are drowning, William," I replied, refusing to call him Dad. "You are standing in a $4 million penthouse trying to buy me off with borrowed debt. It is almost poetic when you think about it. You both marched in here acting like you own the world, demanding to see the boy you once called a parasite. You put on this grand performance of being the rightful guardians of my grandfather's estate, but you are leaking desperation from every pore. You do not want a grandson. You want a bailout." Catherine gripped the strap of her frayed designer bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. "We are his family," she hissed, her face contorting with defensive rage. "We have a right to see him. We are his grandparents, and we deserve to be part of his life after you maliciously kept him hidden from us." I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I matched her aggressive posture but kept my emotions entirely locked down. "Do not ever use the word family with me," I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Let us take a quick trip down memory lane, Catherine. Let us talk about exactly how much you value family." It was February 14th, 14 years ago. The exact temperature outside was 12 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind chill made it feel like sub-zero. "Do you remember that night, William?" I turned my piercing gaze to the man who contributed half my genetics, because I remember every single second of it. I remember standing in the kitchen, terrified, handing you the positive pregnancy test. I remember the exact shade of purple your face turned before you grabbed me by my hair. You dragged me up the stairs while I begged you to stop. You pulled giant black plastic garbage bags from the hall closet and started throwing everything I owned into them. You did not even let me pack. You just hurled my clothes, my shoes, my school books into the trash where you decided I belonged. I remember the sound of the front door slamming behind me. You threw those black garbage bags out onto the snow-covered driveway. The bags split open, scattering my winter coat and my boots across the freezing pavement. I stood on the porch in a thin sweatshirt, violently shivering, crying so hard I could barely breathe. I knocked on the heavy oak door for 2 straight hours. I begged you to let me back inside just for the night. I promised I would figure it out the next morning. But you just turned off the porch light. You stood at the living room window watching your pregnant teenager freeze in the dark, and you closed the blinds. Catherine opened her mouth to speak, but I immediately cut her off. Do not try to rewrite history, I commanded. You did not just kick me out. You made sure I had absolutely nothing to survive on. You erased me from your life with clinical precision. You never called to see if I froze to death that night. You never checked to see if your grandson survived the pregnancy. For 14 years I was dead to you. And now you dare to stand in my home wearing your cheap borrowed clothes and demand to play the role of loving grandparents. You do not care about the boy. You care about the signature he can provide. You care about the money my grandfather locked away from you. You are putting on this pathetic display of parental authority because you are absolutely terrified of what happens if you do not get those funds today. Your entire existence is a fragile house of cards built on maxed-out credit and suburban lies. You thought you could walk in here and bully a desperate teenager into submission? You thought you could wave a high-interest cash advance in my face and I would eagerly obey. But you are not looking at that scared girl anymore. You are looking at the woman who survived the cold you left her in. I know exactly how to recognize a failing enterprise when I see one. And right now, looking at the two of you, I see nothing but a bankrupt operation begging for a lifeline. Your fake smiles and hollow demands disgust me. You gave up the right to act like my family the second you locked that door. The sharp chime of the private elevator cut through the heavy silence in the room. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. My parents both snapped their heads toward the entryway, visibly relieved by the sudden interruption. I did not move. I already knew exactly who was stepping into my home. My older sister Brittany marched out of the elevator cabin, acting as if she owned the entire building. Beside her walked her husband Donovan. He was a tall, impeccably dressed African-American man who carried himself with a quiet, commanding presence. As a director of auditing at a top-tier financial firm, Donovan was a man who observed everything and said very little. He stepped onto the hardwood floor and deliberately paused, remaining a few paces behind his wife. His dark eyes met mine across the expanse of the penthouse. He gave a single, subtle nod. I held his gaze for a fraction of a second, before looking away, keeping my expression entirely blank. He was the one piece on this chessboard my family had completely failed to account for. Brittany immediately attempted to dominate the physical space. She strutted past our parents, her high heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. She was draped in a heavy beige designer coat that she wore draped over her shoulders like a cape, attempting to project an aura of generational wealth. Tucked securely into the crook of her elbow was a bright orange Birkin bag positioned perfectly so everyone in the room would be forced to look at it. She paused in the center of the living area, tilting her head back to inspect my soaring ceilings and the custom lighting fixtures. She let out a loud theatrical sigh before turning her attention to me. "Well, this is certainly a choice," Brittany announced, her voice echoing with that familiar dripping condescension. "It is so stark and cold in here, Lauren. It looks exactly like a corporate lobby. You would think someone spending this kind of money on a rental would hire a decent decorator to warm the place up. But then again, you never really did have any taste, did you? Always preferring the cheap and easy route in life." She did not wait for me to answer. She breezed past the custom furniture, running her fingers dismissively over the back of a chair before turning to our parents. "Mom. Dad, I told you not to come up here alone." She scolded them lightly, adopting the role of the protective, successful golden child. "You know how difficult she gets when she feels backed into a corner. You should have waited in the lobby for Donovan and me to handle this mess." Catherine immediately rushed to Brittany, seeking refuge behind her favorite daughter. "She is being completely unreasonable, Brittany. We offered her the money just like we planned, but she is throwing one of her classic tantrums. She is refusing to bring the boy out. Brittany rolled her eyes, dramatically tightening her grip on her orange handbag. She turned her piercing gaze back to me, treating me exactly like the desperate teenager they had discarded over a decade ago. "Lauren, stop being so difficult," she commanded. Her tone was sharp and authoritative, expecting immediate obedience. "We do not have time for your typical dramatic victim routine today. We have a car waiting downstairs and a meeting scheduled with the estate executors at 2 o'clock. We are already running behind schedule because you refused to answer a simple phone call and forced us to track down this address." I remained seated, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I watched her parade around my living room, projecting a lifestyle I knew for an absolute fact she could not afford. I saw the desperate way she clutched that bag like a shield. I saw the way her eyes darted nervously around the expensive details of my home, silently calculating how I could possibly afford to be standing in a space so far above her own social bracket. Grandfather left a very clear set of instructions. Brittany continued pacing back and forth to ensure she held center stage. He locked the trust fund behind a series of ridiculous legal hurdles because his mind was clearly slipping at the end. "The lawyers are demanding a physical signature and a DNA swab from your son before they will release the capital to mom and dad. It is a completely absurd formality, but the bank is refusing to budge. So you need to stop playing these petty games and hand over the child." I looked from Brittany to my parents, noting the smug satisfaction returning to their faces now that their golden child had arrived to enforce their demands. They genuinely believed that volume and arrogance could override legal reality. Brittany took a step closer, towering over the marble table, attempting to use her physical presence to intimidate me into compliance. Her expensive perfume filled the space between us, a cloying scent designed to mask the rot underneath. "Do not try to ruin this for us, Lauren," she sneered, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "This family has been through enough stress recently without you trying to sabotage our inheritance just because you hold a grudge about the past. You made your choices 14 years ago. You decided to throw away your future and humiliate our parents. They have graciously agreed to give you a $10,000 handout today just to make this process smooth. You should be thanking them on your knees for even considering giving you a dime of that money. Take the check, sign the release, and let us get out of this sterile, depressing apartment." Donovan stood silently near the entryway, his hands clasped behind his back. He did not agree with his wife. He did not defend his in-laws. He simply watched the scene unfold with the calm, analytical precision of a man who spent his life dissecting fraud. He knew exactly what was about to happen, and he was content to let Brittany dig her own grave with every arrogant word she spoke. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, letting my voice cut through the lingering echoes of her monologue. Brittany scoffed, crossing her arms tightly over her designer coat. "I will be finished when you bring the boy out here. We need his signature, and we need it right now. We are the rightful managers of that estate, and we are not leaving without what belongs to us. Stop being selfish, Lauren. Hand over the child so we can claim our money and never have to look at you again." I did not blink. I did not shift in my chair. I simply looked at my older sister and let her desperate demand hang in the sterile air of my penthouse. Brittany mistook my silence for fear. She assumed the sudden lack of a response meant I was finally crumbling under the weight of her authority. A triumphant smirk stretched across her face. She reached into her orange designer bag and pulled out her smartphone, holding it up like a loaded weapon. "If you want to do this the hard way, Lauren, we absolutely can." Brittany threatened, her voice climbing an octave to demonstrate her feigned concern. "You have always been completely unstable. You got pregnant at 17. You dropped out of high school. You dragged a child into this world with no money, no husband, and no future. Do you really think anyone is going to believe you are suddenly some high-powered executive living in a $4 million property? You are probably involved in something highly illegal to afford this place. If you do not walk into that hallway and bring my nephew out here right now, I am calling Child Protective Services. I will tell them you are an unfit mother harboring a minor in a dangerous and illicit environment. I will have him removed from your custody by the end of the day and placed with his rightful family." The threat was designed to strike terror into my heart. 14 years ago, the mere mention of losing my child would have sent me into a hyperventilating panic. I would have dropped to my knees and begged for mercy. But the woman sitting at this marble table had spent the last decade tearing apart corporate entities and navigating hostile takeovers. I knew the law better than I knew my own heartbeat. I calmly picked up my own phone from the table and unlocked the screen. I slid it across the smooth marble surface until it stopped directly in front of Brittany. The screen displayed the direct dial number for the New York State Central Register of Child Abuse and Maltreatment. Make the call. I challenged my voice, absolutely devoid of any emotion. Press the green button, Brittany. Let us get the authorities involved right now. Brittany stared at the glowing screen, her confident smirk faltering. She glanced nervously at our parents, who suddenly looked incredibly rigid. She did not touch the phone. Go ahead, I urged, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. But before you press call, let me educate you on exactly what happens next. When the caseworker arrives, they will conduct a thorough investigation under Article 10 of the New York Family Court Act. They will look for evidence of a neglected child. According to Section 1012, Subdivision FA, neglected child is one whose physical, mental, or emotional condition has been impaired as a result of the failure of his parent to exercise a minimum degree of care. I gestured expansively around the room. The caseworkers will evaluate this environment. They will find a spotless, meticulously maintained penthouse. They will review my son's medical records confirming he receives top-tier health care. They will contact his prestigious private academy and discover that his annual tuition of $60,000 is paid in full directly from my corporate holding account. They will review my impeccable financial portfolio and my completely clean criminal record. They will find a child who is thriving academically, physically, and emotionally. I stood up slowly, letting my height and presence dominate the room. And then, Brittany, the investigation will pivot directly to you, I stated, locking my eyes onto hers. Because under New York Social Services Law Section 422, Subdivision 14, making a knowingly false report of child abuse or maltreatment to the State Central Register is a Class A misdemeanor. Furthermore, since you are trying to extort a financial signature from a minor, I will immediately file a civil lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and malicious prosecution. During the discovery phase of that lawsuit, my legal team will subpoena your bank records. We will subpoena Donovan's tax returns. We will drag every single one of your closely guarded financial secrets into the glaring light of a public courtroom. Brittany took a physical step backward. Her hand dropped to her side and the smartphone slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly onto the marble table. The color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very fragile. But I was not finished. I turned my attention to William and Catherine, who were now staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. And the investigation will not stop with her. I continued, my voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. If Child Protective Services conducts an inquiry to place my son with his rightful family, as Brittany so eloquently suggested, they will have to conduct a deep background check on his proposed guardians. They will look into your household, William. They will examine your massive mortgage arrears. They will see the staggering ratio of your unsecured debt to your dwindling assets. They will interview your neighbors and audit your retirement accounts. Do you really want state investigators digging through your garbage right now? Do you want government officials auditing your accounts to determine if you can afford to feed a teenager when you cannot even afford to pay your own property taxes? William swallowed hard. His face, which had been flushed with arrogant anger just moments ago, turned completely ashen. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Catherine gripped his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. She was physically trembling. The illusion they had walked in with, the illusion that they held all the power, that they could command the room with loud voices and empty threats, shattered into a million irreparable pieces on my floor. You are not dealing with a terrified teenager hiding in the snow anymore, I declared, stepping out from behind the table. You walked into the home of a woman who dismantles multi-million-dollar companies before breakfast. You brought a plastic knife to a nuclear war. You tried to weaponize my child against me, assuming I would fold under the pressure. But all you did was hand me the exact ammunition I need to permanently destroy what is left of your pathetic suburban reputation. If you even think about mentioning my son's name to any authority figure, I will legally and financially bury you so deep you will never see the sun again." The panic in the room was palpable. The heavy breathing of my parents echoed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. They had come to this penthouse expecting to bully a victim. Instead, they found a predator. They finally realized that the helpless girl they had discarded 14 years ago was entirely dead. I was the one holding all the cards, and I was just getting started. The air conditioning kicked on, humming softly in the background, amplifying the absolute silence from my so-called family. William looked at Catherine, and then at Brittany, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an escape route or a counter-argument that simply did not exist. He reached up and loosened his expensive silk tie, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe in the climate-controlled room. The realization that they were completely outmatched was paralyzing them. They were trapped in my domain, suffocating under the weight of their own miscalculated ambush. I watched their eyes dart toward the elevator doors, silently measuring the distance, calculating if they should retreat. But greed is a powerful anchor, and their desperation for the trust fund kept their feet glued to the floor. They were terrified, but they were also trapped by their own bankruptcy. They had no choice but to stand there and endure the psychological warfare they had so foolishly initiated. William realized that physical intimidation and empty threats of child protective services had completely failed. The bluster had evaporated, leaving only the raw, desperate reality of his financial ruin exposed for everyone in the room to see. But William was a man who had spent his entire adult life controlling the narrative around his family. He was not accustomed to losing control, especially not to the daughter he had written off as collateral damage 14 years ago. He visibly swallowed his fear, straightening his spine and puffing out his chest in a final, desperate attempt to reclaim the patriarchal high ground. He reached into the inner pocket of his slightly oversized suit jacket and pulled out a thick, folded legal document. The heavy parchment paper crinkled loudly in the quiet penthouse. "This is not a negotiation, Lauren," he stated, projecting his voice to sound booming and authoritative. He slapped the thick stack of papers onto the marble table right next to the high-interest cash advance check Catherine had thrown down earlier. "This is the last will and testament of your grandfather. It is legally binding, and it leaves us no room for your emotional games. You think you hold all the leverage because you live in a fancy high-rise and know how to quote family court statutes. But you do not control this situation. The law controls this situation. And the law requires your son." Catherine stood a little taller behind him, a smug, victorious smile returning to her face. She smoothed down the front of her skirt, suddenly finding her confidence again now that the ultimate weapon was on the table. "Tell her what it says, William." She prompted, her tone dripping with renewed arrogance. "Read the exact stipulations to her so she understands why we are not leaving this apartment without that boy." William cleared his throat, adjusting his posture to mimic a seasoned courtroom attorney. He unfolded the document with deliberate slowness, making a show of running his finger down the dense legal text. "Your grandfather was a wealthy man, Lauren." He began, his eyes scanning the page. "He left behind a substantial portfolio. We are talking about an 8-figure estate locked in a highly restricted trust." But as he got older, his mind clearly started to slip. He became paranoid and obsessed with preserving the bloodline. He insisted on adding a series of incredibly restrictive clauses to the final draft of his will just 3 years ago. The primary trust cannot simply be dispersed to his immediate heirs. The executors are legally bound to follow a very specific chain of verification before a single cent is released to anyone. I remained silent, watching him perform. I kept my face entirely impassive, giving him absolutely nothing to work with. I simply let him dig the hole deeper. Section 4, Paragraph B. William read aloud, tapping the paper forcefully. "The disbursement of the primary trust to the designated guardians, namely myself and your mother, is strictly contingent upon the verified existence and physical signature of the great-grandson. The estate executors require two things to unlock the funds. First, a court-ordered DNA swab from the boy to definitively prove genetic lineage. Second, a physical signature from him acknowledging his status as a living heir in the presence of the estate attorneys. Only after those two conditions are met will the capital be transferred into our control. Brittany let out a loud theatrical laugh from across the room. She tossed her orange designer bag onto one of my custom armchairs and crossed her arms, looking at me with pure disdain. "Do you understand what that means, Lauren?" she mocked. "It means you are completely irrelevant. You do not get a penny. You do not get to make any decisions. Grandfather designated Mom and Dad as the rightful guardians of the trust. They control the money. The only reason we are even speaking to you right now is because your son happens to be a biological prop required to unlock the vault. You are just the gatekeeper holding the key to our inheritance. Once we get his signature in that DNA swab, we will be walking out of here with millions, and you will be left with absolutely nothing but your bitter attitude." William nodded in agreement, leaning over the marble table to look me directly in the eyes. His previous fear had been entirely replaced by a sickening display of greedy triumph. "The estate lawyers are waiting at their office downtown right now," he explained, his voice thick with anticipation. "We have a private car idling on the street below. We are taking the boy downtown. We will have the medical technician perform the swab, we will get his signature on the probate documents, and the funds will be wired into our accounts by the end of the business day." The bank has already confirmed the escrow release process. The sheer arrogance of his plan was astounding. He was laying out his trap with the supreme confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted everyone in the room. He genuinely thought he had backed me into an inescapable legal corner. He believed that the power of a written will and the promise of a massive fortune would force me to surrender my child to their custody for the afternoon. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that he was proudly marching straight into an explosive minefield. "You really think it is that simple?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You think you can just march into my home, wave a piece of paper in my face, and demand I hand over my son so you can cash a check?" "It is exactly that simple," William countered, slamming his hand flat against the document. "The law is the law, Lauren. You cannot hide him. If you refuse to comply, we will seek a court order to compel the DNA test. We will drag you in front of a judge and explain that you are maliciously withholding an heir and interfering with the execution of a multi-million-dollar estate. You will be held in contempt of court. You could face fines or even jail time for obstructing the probate process. We have top-tier lawyers ready to file the injunction the second we leave this building. You are completely trapped." Catherine leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Just bring him out here, Lauren," she demanded. "Stop trying to fight us. You lost this battle the moment your grandfather signed this document. Bring the boy out, let us get what belongs to us, and we will never bother you again. This is your only way out." I looked at the thick stack of papers resting on the marble table. I looked at the signatures at the bottom of the page. I looked at the triumphant, greedy faces of my parents and my sister. They were so blinded by their desperate need for cash that they had failed to notice the massive glaring inconsistencies in their own narrative. They had failed to consider why an allegedly paranoid old man would create such a bizarre specific set of rules for an heir he supposedly believed was dead. They had built their entire rescue plan on a foundation of monumental deceit. And it was finally time to pull the pin. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my intertwined fingers. I let a slow, dark smile spread across my face. I looked directly at the thick legal document sitting on the marble table. "That is a fascinating set of stipulations," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Let us dissect that logic for a moment, William. Section 4, paragraph B, requires a DNA swab and a physical signature from my son. Does that not strike you as incredibly odd? Why would a man who supposedly trusted you to manage an 8-figure estate put such specific, bizarre hurdles in place? Why would my grandfather, a man you just claimed was losing his mind, demand definitive biological proof of life before releasing a single cent to his designated guardians. William shifted his weight, his confidence suddenly faltering. Old men do crazy things when they are close to death. He stammered, adjusting his suit jacket again. He was paranoid. He watched too many crime documentaries. The lawyers told him to secure the bloodline, and he took it to an extreme. It means nothing. It means absolutely everything, I corrected sharply. I stood up and began to pace the length of the marble table, keeping my eyes locked on his. Grandfather was a retired appellate judge. He did not write sloppy contracts, and he certainly did not mandate DNA tests for children he believed were happily living in the suburbs. So let us talk about what you actually told him 14 years ago. Let us talk about the lie of the century. Catherine interjected, her voice shrill and defensive. We did not tell him anything out of the ordinary. We protected him from the shame you brought on this family. We spared him the heartbreak of knowing what a failure his granddaughter had become. You spared him? I asked, stopping directly in front of her. Is that what you call it? Because I reviewed the estate audit logs, Catherine. I saw the massive cash withdrawals from his accounts, dating all the way back to the year you kicked me out. I saw the wire transfers marked as legal and investigative fees. You did not spare him anything. You bled him dry. I slammed my hand flat on the table, causing both of them to jump. Tell me exactly what you told him, William. Say it out loud right now. Tell Brittany what you said happened to the baby. William looked at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. His face turned a splotchy shade of red. We did what we had to do to protect the family name, he muttered, shifting nervously under my intense scrutiny. Say it, I commanded, my voice echoing off the glass walls. William swallowed hard, visibly sweating under the pressure. We told him the boy did not make it, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. We told him there were severe complications at the hospital, and the baby died during delivery. We said the overwhelming grief broke your mind entirely. Brittany gasped, dropping her phone onto the plush armchair. You told grandfather the baby was dead, she asked, looking at our parents with wide, horrified eyes. But why would you tell him that? Because a dead baby earns immense sympathy, I answered for them, never taking my eyes off William. A dead baby explains why there are no photographs, no holiday visits, no christenings for him to attend. But that was not the end of the narrative, was it, William? A dead baby does not explain why I never came to Sunday dinners. So what did you tell him about me? Where did you say I went after this fictional tragic loss? Catherine lifted her chin, attempting to project a twisted sense of righteousness to cover her immense guilt. We told him you went crazy with grief, she stated, her voice trembling but defiant. We told him you got involved with a highly dangerous crowd to cope with the pain. We said you ran away across the border to join a cartel. We told him you were lost to the violent streets of Mexico, and we were desperately trying to find you and bring you home. The absolute depravity of her words hung heavily in the air. I let the sheer magnitude of their deception sink into the room. They had completely fabricated the death of an infant and painted me as a cartel associate just to save face at their local country club. And grandfather believed you, I said, piecing the final parts of the puzzle together for everyone to hear. He believed his great-grandson was dead, and his granddaughter was missing in a dangerous foreign country. He was utterly devastated. He wanted to help, so you offered him a convenient solution. You told him you knew specialized people who could track me down, but it would require heavy off-the-books funding to pay them. William closed his eyes tightly, confirming everything without saying a single word. Donovan stood completely still in the background, his face a mask of absolute disgust as he processed the depth of his in-laws' financial depravity. You milked a grieving old man for a decade? I summarized, my voice dripping with pure disgust. You took hundreds of thousands of dollars from him under the guise of paying elite private investigators to find me. You used that stolen money to pay off your luxury cars, to fund your country club memberships, to maintain your pathetic suburban facade. You weaponized his love and his deep grief to fund your fake lifestyle. And it worked perfectly until he actually started asking for concrete proof. He wanted to see the official investigator reports. William mumbled, staring at his shoes. He started getting highly suspicious when years passed and we had no new, verifiable information. He threatened to cut us out of the will entirely if we did not bring you home immediately. So you changed the story, I guess taking a step closer to him. You realized the cartel lie had run its course. What did you tell him right before he finalized this new will 3 years ago? We told him we finally found you, Catherine cried out, tears streaming down her face. We told him the investigators located you and the baby. We told him the boy had actually survived the delivery and you were hiding in the city. We said we were in delicate negotiations to bring you both back into the family, but it was extremely sensitive. We said we needed more time and a lot more money to pay off the dangerous people hiding you. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. It was a masterpiece of financial exploitation. They had resurrected a dead child and fabricated a hostage negotiation just to keep the checks clearing. And that is why the will is structured this way, I concluded, pointing to the heavy document on the table. Grandfather stopped believing your lies. He knew you were actively draining his accounts. He structured the final trust to ensure you could not steal another dime until he had absolute physical proof that my son was alive and safe. He demanded a DNA swab and a physical signature in front of his attorneys because he knew you were entirely capable of hiring a child actor to play the role of his great-grandson. He built an impenetrable legal fortress around his wealth to protect it from you. William looked up, his eyes wild with terror and desperation. We did it to survive Lauren. The economy tanked, the mortgage rates skyrocketed. We had to keep up appearances, we had to protect the family legacy. You did it for your own fragile egos, I corrected sharply. You built a 14-year empire of fraud on the back of a child you threw into the snow. And now you are standing in my living room demanding that very same child save you from the consequences of your own disgusting actions. You need his signature today because the estate lawyers are heavily auditing those fake private investigator expenses. You need him to prove the lie was actually the truth, so you do not go to federal prison for defrauding an elderly man. The entire room fell silent as the terrifying reality of their situation fully materialized. The trap William thought he had set for me was actually a massive federal indictment waiting to happen. They were not here to claim a luxurious inheritance. They were here desperately trying to avoid prison. The heavy silence that followed my statement was absolute. The air in the penthouse felt thick enough to choke on. William stood completely frozen, his breathing shallow and rapid. Catherine looked as though she might physically collapse onto the marble floor. The reality of their impending federal indictment hung over them, casting a dark shadow over their desperate facade. Then the heavy mahogany door to the East Wing library clicked open. The sound was soft, but in that deafening quiet, it rang out like a gunshot. Footsteps approached, deliberately paced against the hardwood floor. Out of the shadows stepped my son. Leo was only 14 years old, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of a seasoned executive. He was dressed impeccably in his private academy uniform, wearing a crisp white dress shirt, a perfectly knotted crimson tie, and a tailored navy blue blazer bearing the school crest. His dark slacks were pressed, his leather shoes polished to a high shine. He did not look like a teenager interrupting a family dispute. He looked like a board member arriving to audit a failing company. Leo paused at the edge of the living room, his hands resting casually in his pockets. He swept his dark, intelligent eyes across the scene, taking in the tension, the stack of legal documents on the marble table, and the terrified faces of the three strangers invading his home. He did not look surprised or afraid. He simply observed. The moment Catherine laid eyes on him, a jarring, terrifying transformation occurred. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside her brain, completely overriding her previous panic. The sheer terror of federal prison was instantly shoved aside, replaced by a grotesque theatrical performance of maternal love. Her face, which had just been pale and contorted with guilt, suddenly broke into a massive, trembling smile. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, bringing both hands to her cheeks, in a display of exaggerated awe. William, look at him. Just look at our beautiful boy. William blinked, snapping out of his paralyzed state. He seized the opportunity, instantly adopting the role of the proud, emotional patriarch. The transition was so abrupt it was genuinely sickening to witness. He smoothed down his wrinkled suit jacket and forced a booming, jovial laugh that echoed unnaturally in the sterile room. "Look at how much you have grown," William exclaimed, taking a large, eager step toward my son. "You are a spitting image of the men in our family, Leo. We have been waiting so long for this day. Come here, son. Come give your grandfather a hug." Catherine hurried forward right beside him, extending her arms wide. Her voice took on a high-pitched, syrupy tone that dripped with fake affection. "We have missed you every single day, my sweet boy," she crooned, tears of manipulation springing to her eyes. "We have been looking everywhere for you. We brought you so many presents over the years, just waiting for the moment we could finally hold you in our arms. Come to Grandma, sweetheart. We are your family." They moved together, a desperate, coordinated unit, attempting to physically envelop the boy they had spent 14 years pretending was dead. They reached out with greedy, grasping hands, treating him not as a human being, but as their literal ticket to financial salvation. Leo did not flinch. He did not retreat in fear or seek shelter behind me. As their hands reached out to embrace him, he simply took one smooth, measured step backward. The movement was so fluid and precise that William and Catherine stumbled slightly, grasping at empty air. They froze, standing awkwardly in the middle of the living room, with their arms still extended. The sickeningly sweet smiles on their faces began to crack as they met Leo's gaze. He looked at them with cold, chilling calculation. It was a flawless mirror image of the exact same look I gave corporate executives right before I liquidated their companies. He did not see loving grandparents yearning for a reunion. He looked at them as if they were fascinating, but ultimately repulsive specimens trapped under a microscope slide. His eyes methodically scanned William, noting the beads of sweat forming on his forehead and the slight tremor in his hands. He shifted his gaze to Catherine, analyzing her forced smile, the outdated designer bag clutched in her grip, and the sheer desperation radiating from her posture. There was zero warmth in my son. I had raised him to understand the mechanics of wealth, the psychology of negotiation, and the brutal reality of human greed. I had made sure he knew exactly who these people were and exactly what they had done to me. He was not a naive child desperate for familial connection. He was a highly educated, financially literate young man who recognized a hostile takeover attempt when he saw one. "Please do not touch me," Leo said. His voice was calm, polite, and utterly devoid of any affection. The volume was perfectly modulated, cutting through their fake enthusiasm like a freshly sharpened blade. Catherine let her arms drop to her sides, her theatrical smile shattering completely. "Leo, honey," she stammered, trying to regain her footing. "We are your grandparents. We love you. We just want to bring you home where you truly belong." "You do not love me," Leo replied, tilting his head slightly as he continued his clinical observation of her. "You love the legal utility my biology provides. You love the fact that my signature can shield you from an impending federal fraud investigation. There is a very distinct difference between affection and extortion, Catherine." William bristled at the use of his first name from a 14-year-old boy. "Now listen here, young man." He started, his fake jovial tone slipping to reveal the arrogant bully underneath. "We are your family. You will show us the proper respect. We have gone through hell to find you and secure your rightful inheritance." William finished his sentence hastily, attempting to mask his rising panic with a facade of forced authority. He took a deep breath, smoothing his expensive silk tie, and decided to pivot his strategy. The aggressive patriarch routine had failed. The emotional grandparent act had crashed and burned. Now he would try the one language he truly believed every person on Earth spoke fluently. He would try bribery. He took a step forward, adopting a conspiratorial man-to-man tone that he likely used on gullible clients at his country club. "Listen to me, Leo," William said, lowering his voice to a smooth, calculated pitch. "Your mother has clearly filled your head with a lot of exaggerated nonsense. I get it. She is angry about the past. But let us talk about your future. Let us talk about what I can actually do for you right now today. William spread his arms wide, painting an invisible picture of immense wealth in the air between them. You are 14 years old. In a couple of years, you will be driving. How does a brand new Aston Martin sound? Or maybe a custom Range Rover? Whatever you want. You want to travel the world first class. Done. You want VIP access to the best clubs, the finest restaurants, the most exclusive universities on the East Coast. It is all yours. Your grandfather left behind a massive fortune, and as the primary executors of that trust, your grandmother and I have the power to give you the life of a billionaire. Catherine nodded enthusiastically beside him, her eyes gleaming with renewed hope as she chimed in. That is right, sweetheart. You will never have to worry about a single thing. You will have unlimited credit cards, a mansion in Connecticut, a summer house in the Hamptons. We can give you the absolute best of everything. All you have to do is take a quick luxury car ride downtown with us. A medical professional will take a simple swab of your cheek, and you sign a few standard legal forms in front of a friendly judge. It takes 20 minutes. 20 minutes of your time, Leo, and you become one of the wealthiest teenagers in the state of New York. Leo stood perfectly still. He let William finish his desperate sales pitch. He did not blink at the mention of the sports car or the limitless credit cards. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his navy blue blazer and looked at William with an expression of profound boredom. That is a very generous offer, William Leo said, his voice steady and clinical. However, before I sign any legally binding documents regarding my financial future, I need to clarify a few structural details regarding this supposedly massive trust fund. Since you are claiming to be the designated guardians and primary executors, you must be intimately familiar with the portfolio architecture. William blinked, his confident smile wavering for a fraction of a second. Of course, he stammered lightly. We oversee everything. Excellent, Leo replied, clasping his hands together. Let us start with the asset allocation. What is the current ratio of equities to fixed income within the primary trust corpus? Furthermore, is the capital distributed across domestic markets, or does it carry heavy international exposure to mitigate domestic inflation risks? William opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He stared at his 14-year-old grandson, completely paralyzed. He glanced at Catherine, whose fake smile had frozen into a rigid mask of terror. Well, William chuckled nervously, wiping a bead of sweat from his upper lip. That is highly technical information, Leo. The accountants handle the day-to-day balancing of the stocks and bonds. We just oversee the general wealth distribution. We make sure the money grows. You make sure it grows, Leo repeated, raising a single skeptical eyebrow. Fascinating. Then you must know the liquidity profile of the estate. If you are promising to purchase a high-end luxury vehicle and fund limitless credit cards immediately upon my signature, what percentage of the trust is currently held in highly liquid cash equivalents? Are we talking about liquidating Tier 1 assets to fund these lifestyle purchases? Or are you planning to leverage the trust corpus to secure a line of credit against future yields? William took a physical step backward. His face turned a deep shade of crimson. Listen here, son, he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. You do not need to worry about the boring financial details. That is grown-up business. You just need to know the money is there and it is yours. If the money is mine, then the fiduciary details are explicitly my business, Leo countered without missing a beat. Let us discuss the tax implications of your proposed disbursement. If you transfer significant capital to me as a minor, what generation-skipping transfer tax exemptions are you utilizing? Are the funds currently housed in a revocable or irrevocable trust structure? Because if it is an irrevocable trust dictated by my late great-grandfather, your promise of instant, unlimited access directly violates standard fiduciary duty. Any competent estate attorney would block an arbitrary withdrawal for a sports car as a gross mismanagement of funds. William was practically hyperventilating. His eyes darted around my living room looking for an exit. He pulled at his collar, desperately trying to formulate a coherent response to a teenager who had just verbally eviscerated his entire bribe. It is a standard trust, William blurted out, using empty buzzwords he likely heard on television. It is highly secure. Blue chip stocks, Maximum yields. The lawyers have it all mapped out perfectly. You just sign the paper and we handle the complicated paperwork. Leo shook his head slowly, a look of absolute pity crossing his young face. You do not even know the difference between a liquid asset and a leveraged liability, do you, William? You walked into this penthouse promising me the world, and you cannot even answer basic entry-level questions about wealth management. You are offering me a sports car using funds you do not control from a trust you do not understand. You are not a wealthy patriarch offering me a life of luxury. You are a severely over-leveraged debtor trying to hustle a teenager out of an inheritance to cover your own financial incompetence. Brittany scoffed from across the room, trying to jump to her father's defense. Do not speak to him like that, you arrogant little brat, she hissed. He is offering you a fortune, and you are throwing it in his face with a bunch of memorized accounting terms your mother forced you to learn. I do not memorize terms, Brittany, Leo stated, his dark eyes locking onto her. I manage real capital. My mother taught me how to read a balance sheet before I learned how to ride a bicycle. I know how to spot a bad investment. And right now I am looking at 3 people who represent a catastrophic liability. You have zero liquidity, massive debt, and a rapidly closing window before federal investigators uncover your prolonged estate fraud. Your bribe is mathematically worthless. William clenched his fists at his sides, his entire body trembling with humiliated rage. He had been completely destroyed, dismantled, and exposed by a 14-year-old boy. The illusion of his power was gone. The facade of his wealth was shattered. He stood in the center of the penthouse, breathing heavily, realizing that his carefully constructed plan had just collapsed into dust. He had brought empty promises to a family that demanded hard data, and he had lost everything. Leo did not let the silence linger. He reached casually into the inner breast pocket of his tailored navy blazer and withdrew a sleek silver iPad. The metallic device caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows, gleaming like a freshly sharpened weapon. He unlocked the screen with a quick facial scan, his movements practiced and entirely unbothered. William and Catherine watched him with wide, unblinking eyes. They looked like cornered prey, waiting for the final strike, but unable to look away. Leo tapped the glass screen twice, opening a heavily encrypted financial dossier that my firm had compiled just hours earlier. He adjusted his stance, holding the device securely in his left hand while he scrolled through the data with his right. I watched my son with immense pride. He was executing this takedown with flawless precision, refusing to give them a single inch of emotional ground. You claim you want to give me a life of luxury, William Leo said, his voice echoing sharply in the quiet penthouse. You boast about massive trust funds and brand new sports cars, as if you actually have the capital to back up those promises. But my mother taught me to never accept a verbal guarantee without auditing the underlying collateral. So let us take a factual look at your actual financial standing today. Let us see exactly what kind of empire you are offering me. Leo tapped the screen one more time, bringing up the primary summary page. Let us begin with your personal credit score, William, he announced, his tone shifting into a sharp professional cadence. As of 8 o'clock this morning, your Equifax FICO score is sitting at an abysmal 482. Catherine gasped aloud, her hands flying to her mouth in genuine horror. William took a sharp, ragged breath, his face draining of all remaining color. That is a lie, William choked out, his voice barely a raspy whisper. That is confidential information. You cannot possibly know that. I know everything, William Leo countered without missing a beat. A score of 482 is not just bad. It is catastrophically subprime. It means you cannot even qualify for a standard retail store credit card, let alone finance a custom Range Rover for your teenage grandson. It signifies a complete and total failure to honor your financial obligations. You are a walking liability. Every bank in the country considers you an extreme risk, and your credit utilization ratio is currently maxed out at 99% across all open accounts. You are surviving entirely on the fumes of predatory lending and desperation. Leo did not pause to let the reality sink in. He immediately swiped to the next page of the dossier, his eyes scanning the numbers with ruthless efficiency. Moving on to your real estate assets. Leo continued. You love to brag about your beautiful colonial home in Connecticut. You use it as a prop to project suburban wealth and stability. But according to the public records and the internal bank communications we legally acquired, you are currently exactly $142,687.42 behind on your primary mortgage. Catherine let out a pathetic whimper, leaning heavily against the marble table to keep herself from collapsing. You have ignored 5 consecutive default notices from the lender, Leo read aloud, his voice unwavering. You attempted to refinance the property twice in the last 18 months and were firmly denied both times due to your catastrophic debt-to-income ratio. The bank filed the official notice of default 3 weeks ago. You are actively in the pre-foreclosure stage. Unless you somehow produce a cashier check for nearly $150,000 immediately, the bank will auction your supposedly prestigious home on the courthouse steps. You are promising me a summer house in the Hamptons when you are literally days away from being evicted onto the street. Brittany stood frozen near the armchair, her mouth hanging open. She looked from Leo to her parents, her expression shifting from arrogance to absolute shock. She clearly had no idea the financial rot had spread this deep into their foundation. But Leo was not finished dismantling their facade. Let us discuss your transportation, he said, swiping to the final page of the summary. You drove to Manhattan today in a leased luxury sport utility vehicle, but the payments on that vehicle are currently 4 months in arrears, totaling exactly $5,800 in past due balance. The leasing company has already issued an active repossession order. In fact, our security team noted that you parked the vehicle 3 blocks away in an underground cash garage rather than using our complimentary valet service because you are terrified a roaming tow truck with a license plate scanner will confiscate it. You are hiding your car from repo men while standing in my mother penthouse offering to buy me an Aston Martin. William and Catherine were completely and utterly paralyzed. The sheer volume of hard, indisputable data had stripped them bare. They had spent decades building a carefully curated image of upper-middle-class superiority, hiding their toxic reality behind manicured lawns and expensive tailored suits. They had weaponized that fake wealth to look down on everyone else, especially me. Now, a 14-year-old boy had effortlessly shredded their entire lifelong illusion using nothing but a tablet and cold, hard arithmetic. William stood rooted to the spot, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. He could not yell, he could not threaten, he could not deny a single digit of the data Leo had just recited. Catherine simply stared at the floor, her shoulders hunched, her entire body shaking with the profound humiliation of being so thoroughly exposed. They were completely outmatched, broken down to their very core by the grandchild they thought they could easily manipulate. The silence that filled the penthouse was no longer just tense. It was the sound of a total, permanent destruction. The absolute quiet held for exactly 10 seconds before the shock finally wore off. The profound humiliation of being mathematically dismantled by a 14-year-old boy broke something fundamental inside William. The panic that had paralyzed him instantly morphed into a blind, explosive rage. The pathetic doting grandfather act vanished completely. The sickly sweet smile melted away, leaving behind the cruel, arrogant tyrant I remembered from my childhood. His face contorted, turning a terrifying shade of purple as the veins in his neck bulged against his tight silk collar. He lunged forward, slamming both of his fists onto the marble dining table with enough force to rattle my coffee cup. He ignored Leo entirely and turned his blistering fury directly onto me. "You vindictive little witch," William roared, his voice echoing violently off the glass windows. "You think this is a game. You think you can just fabricate a bunch of fake banking documents and feed them to this boy to humiliate us. You have poisoned his mind. You have filled his head with lies and garbage because you are still throwing a tantrum over something that happened over a decade ago. You are deliberately trying to turn my own grandson against me with these completely manufactured financial spreadsheets." Catherine immediately rallied behind him, her previous terror evaporating into sharp defensive anger. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at me, her voice reaching a shrill, ear-piercing pitch. "You have ruined him!" Catherine shrieked. "Look at how disrespectful he is. A child should never speak to his elders that way. We came here with open arms offering him a fortune, and you have brainwashed him into acting like a cold, heartless robot. You are a terrible mother, Lauren. You always were a selfish, destructive girl, and now you are ruining an innocent child just to get back at us." I did not flinch at their screaming. I simply leaned back in my chair, observing their tantrum with mild amusement. They were reacting exactly like cornered animals, lashing out wildly because the trap they had set had snapped shut on their own ankles. Brittany stomped her designer heel against the hardwood floor, refusing to accept the reality of the situation. She grabbed her orange handbag, clutching it against her chest, as if it could magically shield her from the truth. "That iPad is full of absolute garbage," Brittany yelled, stepping up beside our parents. "Mom and Dad are not facing foreclosure. They are wealthy. They have a massive estate. You probably hired some cheap internet hacker to create a fake credit report just to scare us. You are pathetic, Lauren. You sit in this empty rented apartment and you script this elaborate fantasy to make yourself feel important. You are still just a dropout desperately trying to prove you are better than us." Leo stood his ground, entirely unfazed by the screaming adults. He simply locked the screen of his iPad and slipped it smoothly back into his blazer pocket. "The data is pulled directly from verified institutional servers," he stated calmly. "Denial does not stop a bank auction." "Shut your mouth," William barked, pointing a shaking finger at my son. "I will not be spoken to like a criminal by a disrespectful brat. You know absolutely nothing about real finance or how the real world operates. You are just repeating the script your psychotic mother forced you to memorize." William was hyperventilating now, spit flying from his lips as he struggled to regain control of a room that had thoroughly rejected his authority. He needed leverage. He needed someone with undeniable professional credibility to step in and crush my son's data. He needed an expert to validate his lies and force us into submission. His frantic eyes darted across the room and landed directly on the tall, silent figure standing near the elevator doors. Donovan William barked, his voice laced with desperate authority. "Get over here right now!" Brittany immediately seized on the idea, her face lighting up with malicious glee. She turned toward her husband, waving him forward with an arrogant flick of her wrist. "Yes, Donovan," she demanded. "Step up here and deal with this nonsense. Explain the law to this arrogant girl and her disrespectful brat. Show them what a real financial expert looks like." William nodded aggressively, his chest puffing out as he sought refuge behind his son-in-law professional credentials. "You people want to talk about audits and liquidity?" William sneered, looking back at me with a smug, triumphant grin. "You want to throw around big banking terms to sound smart. Well, Donovan here is a director of auditing at one of the top financial firms in the country. He dismantles corporate accounts for a living. He knows exactly how trusts operate, and he knows exactly what constitutes financial fraud." Catherine clapped her hands together, a triumphant gleam returning to her eyes. "Exactly," she cheered. "Donovan will tell you that a minor cannot legally block a probate execution. Donovan will look at your little fake iPad spreadsheet and prove to everyone here that it is completely fabricated." The toxic trio had found their champion. They huddled together, relying entirely on Donovan to be their ultimate weapon. They were weaponizing his prestigious career, his intellect, and his presence to intimidate me. They genuinely believed that because he was married to the golden child, he would automatically act as their obedient attack dog. They assumed he would step forward, glance at the documents, and authoritatively declare that my son and I were violating federal law by withholding the signature. "Donovan, get over here and put an end to this circus," William commanded again, slamming his hand on the table one more time. "Tell this foolish girl that she is legally obligated to hand over the boy. Tell her that if she continues to interfere with this estate execution, we will have her arrested for probate obstruction. Shut down these ridiculous lies about my credit score and show them who holds the real power in this room." The tension in the penthouse peaked, reaching an almost unbearable level. William, Catherine, and Brittany all stared at Donovan, waiting eagerly for him to deliver the final crushing blow. I remained seated at the table, my hands folded quietly in my lap. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at my sister. I looked directly at Donovan. The African-American executive stood perfectly still by the entryway, his tailored suit immaculate, his posture completely relaxed. He had absorbed every single insult, every screaming demand, and every arrogant order they had just thrown across the room. He watched the frantic, desperate people who called themselves his family. The entire room held its breath, waiting for the audit director to speak. Donovan did not rush. He moved away from the sleek elevator doors with a terrifying, deliberate slowness. His expensive leather dress shoes struck the imported hardwood floor with a steady, rhythmic thud that sounded exactly like a ticking clock counting down to absolute ruin. He did not acknowledge the frantic, desperate gestures William was making. He did not react to the shrill, expectant demands echoing from his wife. He simply walked toward the custom marble dining table with the absolute composure of a corporate executioner stepping up to the block. Every single eye in the penthouse tracked his movement. William puffed out his chest, attempting to project a renewed sense of victorious authority. He clearly expected his highly successful son-in-law to march right up to my son Leo, snatch the tablet from his hands, and loudly declare that the financial data was completely falsified. Catherine actually let out a long, trembling sigh of relief, visibly relaxing her rigid posture as she waited for the prestigious financial expert to save them from the impending federal nightmare. Brittany crossed her arms tighter over her designer coat, wearing a smug, venomous grin. She genuinely believed her husband was about to completely humiliate me in my own home and restore their manufactured social hierarchy. Donovan reached the edge of the massive dining table. He stood directly across from William, but he did not make eye contact with the sweating, panicked man. Instead, Donovan unclasped his hands from behind his back and slowly brought his premium leather briefcase forward. He set it down onto the smooth marble surface, right next to the high-interest cash advance check Catherine had thrown at me earlier. He placed it directly beside the thick, fraudulent legal document William had slapped down in his desperate attempt at extortion. The heavy briefcase landed with a dull, solid thud that seemed to vibrate through the entire room. The silence that wrapped around the penthouse became physically agonizing. It was a thick, suffocating quiet, broken only by the faint hum of the climate control system and the muffled sounds of Manhattan traffic far below my soundproof windows. The air in the room felt incredibly heavy, charged with a volatile static energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. William opened his mouth to issue another commanding order, but the sheer intensity of Donovan's silent focus forced the words to die in his throat. The patriarch stood there, his face still flushed purple with rage, suddenly unsure of how to navigate a subordinate who refused to obey his commands. Brittany stepped forward, reaching a manicured hand out to touch her husband on the shoulder. She intended to guide him to assert her claim over his expertise and direct his professional wrath toward me. Donovan shifted his weight smoothly, sliding just an inch out of her reach before her fingers could make contact. The physical rejection was subtle but devastatingly clear. He completely ignored his wife. He did not look at her. He did not even turn his head to acknowledge her presence. Brittany stumbled slightly, her hand hovering awkwardly in the empty space between them. The smug, victorious smile slid right off her face, replaced by a sharp flash of genuine confusion. She had spent her entire marriage treating this man as a highly compensated accessory to her suburban lifestyle, and for the very first time he was refusing to play his assigned role. He kept his dark, observant eyes locked entirely on me. For a long, tense moment, a silent communication passed between us. It was the mutual understanding of two top-tier corporate professionals who had spent months carefully laying a flawless, inescapable trap. He raised his hands and rested his fingers on the dual brass combination locks of his briefcase. The loud, sharp click of the left latch snapping open echoed through the room like a snapping bone. A second later, the right latch fired open with an equally sharp metallic crack. Donovan slowly lifted the lid of the briefcase, revealing a meticulously organized interior. He reached inside and withdrew a massive, professionally bound legal folio. The document was easily 300 pages thick, enclosed in a heavy black cover, bearing the embossed gold crest of his elite auditing firm. Thick red and yellow tabs stuck out from the edges, marking specific sections of catastrophic financial failure. He placed the massive document firmly onto the marble table, sliding it directly across the smooth surface until it rested perfectly aligned in front of my coffee cup. He smoothed his hand over the cover with absolute precision, finalizing the transfer of evidence. Donovan finally spoke. His voice was incredibly calm, smooth, and completely professional. He did not raise his volume or employ any theatrical anger. He simply delivered the final devastating blow with the clinical detachment of a man presenting a quarterly earnings report. "The forensic audit is complete, Lauren," he stated, looking me directly in the eyes. "Just as you requested." The words hung in the air, suspended like a guillotine blade over their heads. The meaning behind that single sentence took several long, agonizing seconds to penetrate the thick layers of arrogance and denial surrounding my parents. Brittany blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She stared at the thick black folio resting in front of me, and then looked up at her husband in absolute horror. "Donovan? What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice trembling with sudden uncertainty. "Why are you handing her those files? You are supposed to help us. Tell her to give us the boy." William leaned heavily over the table, his hands gripping the marble edge so tightly his knuckles turned white, his face contorted into a mask of furious bewilderment. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, his voice cracking under the mounting pressure. "What forensic audit? You do not work for her. You work for your firm. You are supposed to be explaining the probate law to this arrogant girl, not handing her corporate documents. I demand you tell me what is inside that folder right now." Donovan slowly turned his head to look at his father-in-law. The expression on his face contained absolutely no respect, no warmth, and no familial obligation. He looked at William with a mixture of clinical pity and profound disgust. He reached up and casually adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket, preparing to dismantle the final remaining pillars of their pathetic suburban illusion. "I do work for my firm." William Donovan finally answered, his voice completely devoid of the deference he had maintained for half a decade. "And my firm works for Lauren. In fact, her corporate liquidation enterprise is our largest single account. I was promoted to partner last year specifically because I successfully managed the forensic tracking of her multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. I do not answer to you. I answer to her. She is my most valued client and the smartest financial strategist I have ever had the privilege of working with." William staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. Catherine grabbed the edge of the table, her mouth opening in a silent gasp. Brittany simply stared at her husband, her eyes wide with mounting panic. "You lied to me!" Brittany shrieked, her voice breaking. "You told me you were working late on standard corporate audits. You never told me you were working for her." "I told you I was conducting a deep dive risk assessment for a highly confidential client," Donovan corrected, smoothing his tie. "You simply never bothered to ask for the details because you were too busy spending my money to maintain the pathetic illusion of your wealth. And I kept it confidential because 5 months ago, Lauren approached me with a very specific problem. She noticed several overlapping shell companies attempting to mask enormous amounts of toxic debt. When we traced the origin of those failing accounts, they led directly to this family." Donovan turned his attention away from his wife and focused his piercing gaze entirely on William and Catherine. "You brought me into this family 5 years ago," he said, his tone dropping to a dangerous clinical level. "You paraded me around your exclusive Connecticut country club like a prized acquisition. You loved showing me off to your golf buddies, pointing out my Ivy League degrees and my executive title. You loved using me as your ultimate diversity trophy to prove to your wealthy friends how progressive and forward-thinking you were." He took a slow, deliberate step toward his father-in-law. But behind closed doors, the reality was entirely different. "I sat at your dining table for 5 years, listening to your horrific, passive-aggressive remarks. I endured the constant subtle digs about my background. I listened to you." Catherine acted surprised every single time I demonstrated basic cultural literacy or financial acumen. I swallowed my pride when you introduced me to your social circle as the one who is not like the others, or the one who speaks so articulately. You thought I was deaf to your dog whistle racism. You thought because I wore a tailored suit and kept my mouth shut, I did not see the absolute contempt you held for me. Catherine shook her head frantically, tears of sheer panic finally spilling over her cheeks. No, Donovan, that is not true, she cried out. We love you. You are our son. You do not love anyone. Catherine Donovan shot back, his voice slicing through her fake tears. You only love what people can do for your credit limit. You viewed me exactly the way you viewed Lauren. You saw me as an exploitable resource. You tolerated my presence in your aggressively white suburban fantasy, exclusively because my salary was the only thing keeping your sinking ship afloat. Donovan turned his cold gaze back to his wife. Brittany shrank away from him, retreating until her back hit the glass window. Did you really think I would not notice the hemorrhaging in our joint accounts? Brittany Donovan asked, his voice echoing with devastating precision. I am a forensic auditor. My entire career is built on tracking missing capital. I watched you systematically drain my bonuses for the last 3 years. I watched you transfer tens of thousands of dollars into obscure secondary accounts. At first, I thought you simply had a shopping addiction. I thought you were just desperate to keep up with the other country club wives. But the math did not add up. The outflow was too consistent, too structured. He gestured toward the black folio resting on the marble table. So I did my job. I ran a complete forensic trace on my own household. I followed the money. And do you know what I found, William? I found that my wife was acting as a financial conduit for her bankrupt parents. I found that my hard-earned money was paying the minimum balances on your defaulted credit cards. I found that my annual bonus was covering the property taxes on your heavily mortgaged home. You used your golden child to legally embezzle my income because you were too proud to get actual jobs and too terrified to admit you were completely broke. William tried to speak, to formulate some kind of defense, but his jaw just moved silently. He was utterly destroyed. You treated me like a second-class citizen while using my bank account as your personal emergency fund. Donovan stated, his disgust now entirely visible. You smiled in my face, drank my wine, and subtly insulted my heritage while literally stealing the money right out of my pocket. You thought I was just a blind, obedient workhorse. You completely forgot that you invited a master auditor into your criminal enterprise. Donovan walked over to where I was sitting. He stood firmly behind my right shoulder, physically and symbolically aligning himself entirely with me. He placed his hand respectfully on the back of my chair. When Lauren discovered the depth of your insolvency, she came to me, Donovan explained, addressing the terrified trio. She showed me the unredacted truth about what happened 14 years ago. She showed me the police reports, the financial records, and the absolute brutality of how you threw a pregnant teenager into the freezing snow. She showed me the monster hiding behind your manicured lawn. So we made a professional arrangement. I agreed to conduct a completely legal, highly invasive audit of your entire existence. I mapped every single one of your hidden debts, your maxed-out credit lines, and your fraudulent loan applications. I provided Lauren with the exact blueprint to your financial destruction. He looked down at Brittany, who was now openly sobbing, sliding slowly down the glass window until she hit the floor. I did not just explain the law to this arrogant girl, Donovan concluded, throwing his wife's words right back at her. I armed her. I gave my most valued client the exact coordinates of your vulnerabilities. You brought me here today expecting me to be your obedient attack dog. You demanded I crush this woman and her son. But the only thing I am crushing today is your fraudulent, parasitic existence. The audit is done. The accounts are frozen. The truth is fully documented. I am officially resigning from the role of your diversity trophy and your personal automated teller machine. The sheer impact of Donovan's speech left the room completely paralyzed. The parents had counted on their racial and financial superiority to keep him in line. They had assumed his marriage to their golden child bound him to their sinking ship. Instead, he had meticulously documented their racism and their theft, turning his own exploitation into the ultimate weapon against them. He had handed me the exact keys to their kingdom, and now they had absolutely nowhere left to hide. The parents had counted on their racial and financial superiority to keep him in line. They had assumed his marriage to their golden child bound him to their sinking ship. Instead, he had meticulously documented their racism and their theft, turning his own exploitation into the ultimate weapon against them. He had handed me the exact keys to their kingdom, and now they had absolutely nowhere left to hide. Donovan slowly turned his gaze away from William and Catherine. He looked down at the woman who had been his wife for half a decade. Brittany was still crumpled against the base of the floor-to-ceiling window, her face buried in her hands, weeping loudly. The heavy beige designer coat had slipped off her shoulders, pooling around her on the floor like a deflated parachute. She looked pathetic, stripped of the arrogant armor she had worn when she first strutted out of the elevator. Donovan did not offer her a hand to help her up. He did not crouch down to comfort her. He simply reached back into his premium leather briefcase and pulled out a second, much thinner manila folder. He held it in his right hand, tapping the edge thoughtfully against the marble table. "We have addressed the systemic failure of your parents," Donovan said, his voice carrying the chilling resonance of a judge delivering a sentence. "Now, Brittany, it is time we discuss your personal portfolio. You have spent your entire life believing you are the golden child of this family. You built an entire identity around being the successful, beautiful, obedient daughter who did everything right while Lauren was cast out for being a disappointment. You genuinely believe you are a woman of high society. But a forensic audit does not care about your ego. An audit only cares about the ledger. And your ledger is a catastrophic monument to your own vanity." Brittany slowly lifted her head, her mascara completely ruined, tracking dark streaks down her pale cheeks. "Donovan, please," she sobbed, holding her hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Do not do this right now, not in front of them. Please, we can talk about this at home." "We do not have a home anymore," Brittany Donovan stated with absolute finality. "A home requires a foundation of trust and shared reality. What we have is a crime scene. I want you to stand up and face the reality of what you are." Brittany trembled, but managed to push herself up off the floor, leaning heavily against the glass pane for support. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, trying to make herself look as small and harmless as possible. Donovan opened the manila folder. "Let us begin with your unsecured revolving credit," Donovan announced, reading from the top sheet of paper. "Over the past 24 months, you have secretly opened 11 different credit cards, using a private mailbox 2 towns over to hide the physical statements from me. You maxed out every single one of them. You currently hold exactly $87,412 in secret credit card debt. You use these funds to purchase luxury vacations to Aspen and St. Bart's, telling me that your wealthy girlfriends were completely covering your expenses as a gift. You lied to my face while using money borrowed at a 29% annual percentage rate, just so you could post photographs online and pretend you belonged in their tax bracket." Catherine gasped, her hands flying to her mouth again, as she looked at her favorite daughter in shock. William stared at Brittany, his eyes wide with horrified disbelief. Their perfect golden child was drowning in the exact same toxic financial waste that was destroying them. "I had to maintain my image," Brittany cried, her voice cracking defensively. "You do not understand the pressure, Donovan. Everyone in our social circle expects a certain standard of living. I could not be the only wife showing up to charity galas in last season dresses. I was doing it for us. I was doing it to make you look like a successful partner." "You were doing it because you are a parasite," Donovan corrected, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "But the secret credit cards are merely a symptom of your vanity. The true fatal disease is the wire fraud." Brittany completely stopped breathing. The blood drained from her face so fast, I thought she might actually lose consciousness and hit the floor again. She lunged forward, desperately reaching for the folder in his hands. "Donovan, no!" she shrieked, pure terror ripping through her vocal cords. He smoothly stepped out of her reach, holding the document out of her grasp. "On October 12th of last year, you accessed my private Vanguard investment portal." Donovan read, his eyes scanning the data with ruthless precision. "This was a separate individual brokerage account established long before our marriage, explicitly protected by our prenuptial agreement. You forged my digital signature. You bypassed the two-factor authentication by intercepting the security code on my secondary work phone while I was asleep. You illegally liquidated $45,000 in mutual funds and transferred the capital directly to an offshore shell account to pay off a private loan shark you hired to cover your gambling debts. William stumbled backwards, bumping hard into the edge of the sofa. You forged his signature, William stammered, staring at his daughter as if she were a complete stranger. Brittany, you committed federal wire fraud. She committed identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny, Donovan confirmed, turning the page. It is a textbook violation of federal banking statutes. I have the exact IP address logs, the device recognition data, and the routing numbers. The paper trail is absolutely bulletproof. You did not just drain my bank accounts, Brittany. You actively, maliciously committed serious felonies against your own husband to finance a fake reality. Brittany collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing hysterically. I am sorry, she wailed, burying her face in her hands. I was going to put the money back. I was going to fix it once the trust fund cleared. I swear, Donovan, I was going to make it right. You were going to use stolen inheritance money to cover up stolen investment funds, Donovan summarized, shaking his head in sheer disgust. You are exactly like your parents. You are a financial black hole consuming everything around you and producing absolutely nothing of value. Which brings me to the ultimate symbol of your pathetic, fraudulent existence. Donovan walked over to the custom armchair where Brittany had tossed her bright orange designer bag. He picked it up by the leather handles, holding it out in front of him like a contaminated piece of evidence. He turned the bag around, examining the stitching and the hardware under the bright morning light pouring into the penthouse. You walked into Lauren home today wielding this Birkin bag like a weapon, Donovan said, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. You deliberately positioned it to intimidate her to prove that you are a woman of immense wealth and superior social standing. You told me you spent 2 years on a waiting list and paid $22,000 for this exclusive piece. You paraded it around your country club demanding respect. He reached inside the bag and pulled out a small, sharp pair of tactical scissors he kept on his keychain. Before Brittany could even scream, Donovan drove the scissors directly into the side of the orange leather and violently ripped a massive, jagged gash straight down the center of the bag. Brittany shrieked as if she had been physically stabbed, throwing her hands out in horror. "What are you doing?" she screamed. "That is a $20,000 bag." "No," Donovan stated calmly, tossing the mutilated bag onto the marble table where it landed with a cheap, hollow smack. "It is a high-grade counterfeit manufactured in a sweatshop in Guangzhou. A real Birkin is constructed with saddle stitching using waxed linen thread. This bag is held together by machine-stitched polyester. A real Birkin features solid brass hardware plated in gold. This hardware is cheap zinc alloy that is already chipping at the edges. And the interior serial stamp belongs to a production batch from a factory that was shut down 3 years ago for intellectual property theft. I had the bag appraised by a luxury authenticator while you were at the salon last week. It is a fake, Brittany. Just like your wealth, just like your superiority, just like your entire miserable existence." Brittany stared at the destroyed bag, her chest heaving with violent sobs. The ultimate symbol of her golden child status. Her primary weapon of social intimidation was lying in pieces on my table, exposed as a worthless imitation. Her entire identity had been completely stripped away, leaving her with nothing but criminal liability and massive debt. The marriage was not a partnership. It had been exposed as a parasitic drain, and the host had just aggressively, surgically severed the connection. Donovan stood tall, looking down at the ruined woman with cold, absolute finality, leaving her publicly, completely, and utterly humiliated. The sound of Brittany weeping was the only noise left in the $4 million penthouse. William and Catherine stared at the shredded fake leather on the table and then slowly turned their terrified eyes back to me. The manufactured reality they had clung to for 14 years was entirely eradicated. They had walked into this building believing I was a scared, vulnerable target. Now they were trapped in a room with a highly trained auditor who had just financially executed their golden child. But the true scope of their nightmare was only just beginning. I stepped forward, my custom Italian heels clicking sharply against the imported floor, closing the distance between myself and my biological parents. "You came in here demanding to know how I afford to live in a place like this," I said, my voice vibrating with icy authority. "You asked which rich old man I was leeching off of, because your limited suburban minds cannot comprehend a woman building genuine wealth on her own. Allow me to formally introduce myself, Catherine. I do not work for anyone. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Resolution Partners. We are a specialized corporate liquidation and distressed debt acquisition firm. I do not just manage money. I buy the toxic failing debt of bankrupt entities, and I dismantle them for massive profit. When arrogant, incompetent executives over-leverage their companies to maintain fake, lavish lifestyles, their creditors call me. I swoop in, seize their physical assets, liquidate their portfolios, and strip their operations down to the studs. I am the apex predator of the financial food chain." William flinched, his eyes darting frantically as the brutal terminology washed over him. He was a man who worshipped corporate hierarchy, and he was suddenly realizing he was standing in the presence of an industry titan. "You told my grandfather I ran away to join a cartel." I continued, taking another deliberate step toward him. "The irony is almost beautiful, William. I did not run to the streets. I ran to Wall Street. While you were busy stealing money from a grieving old man, I was working 100-hour weeks. I put myself through night school studying complex bankruptcy law, forensic accounting, and hostile acquisitions. I slept on a mattress on the floor of a freezing studio apartment so I could save every single penny to launch my first holding company. I learned exactly how to analyze risk profiles, identify mezzanine debt, and execute hostile takeovers. I built a firm that preys entirely on people exactly like you. People who buy things they cannot afford to impress people they do not even like. My firm handles the collateralized debt obligations that big banks refuse to touch. We buy unsecured liabilities at a fraction of a cent on the dollar, and we ruthlessly pursue the debtors until every single dime is recovered or their assets are entirely seized. I have seized private jets. I have foreclosed on commercial skyscrapers. I have dismantled entire manufacturing supply chains because a CEO thought he could hide his insolvency behind falsified accounting statements. You walked in here thinking you could play a game of financial chess with me, but you do not even know how to set up the board." Catherine shook her head, her perfectly styled hair now a disheveled mess. She was desperately trying to reconcile the image of her discarded pregnant teenage daughter with the ruthless billionaire standing in front of her. "This apartment," she whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "You said you own it." "I do not just own it, Catherine," I corrected sharply. "I bought this entire top floor in cash. It is held completely unencumbered in a Delaware-based limited liability company, which acts as a subsidiary shell for my primary wealth management trust. There is no mortgage. There is no landlord. I possess sole controlling equity. And this penthouse is just a drop in the bucket. My personal net worth eclipses your wildest, most desperate financial fantasies. The trust fund you are trying to steal from my grandfather today, the one you are willing to commit federal fraud to unlock that amount of money, is what my firm considers a minor rounding error on a Tuesday afternoon. I generate more liquid capital in a single fiscal quarter than you have seen in your entire miserable lifetime." The gravity of my words physically crushed them. William's knees buckled slightly, forcing him to lean heavily against the marble dining table for support. He looked at the vast, luxurious expanse of the room with a new, horrifying perspective. He was not looking at a lucky girl who stumbled into money. He was looking at a financial warlord. He realized that the very skills I used to dismantle massive failing corporations could be easily applied to completely eradicate his own fragile existence. He realized that Donovan, the man he thought was his obedient diversity trophy, was actually my highly compensated weapon acting under my direct instruction. "You have absolutely no power here, William," I stated, lowering my voice to a lethal calm. "You barged into my territory demanding compliance from a child. You thought you could intimidate me with a fake will and empty threats. You failed to realize that I specialize in destroying fraudulent debtors. I know exactly how to trace your hidden liabilities." I know exactly how to trigger debt covenants that will force your immediate bankruptcy. In the corporate world, when a bankrupt entity tries to force a hostile action against a superior firm, they get completely wiped out. You are entirely at my mercy. I hold the absolute power to either let you walk out of those elevator doors with nothing or to legally obliterate you so thoroughly that you will spend the rest of your natural lives fighting federal indictments from a prison cell. I watched the sheer terror settle into their bones. The silence was absolute. But I was not finished. I turned to Donovan. He knew exactly what to do. He reached into the very bottom of his briefcase and withdrew a remarkably old, faded manila envelope. It was a stark contrast to the modern digital tablets and glossy audit reports we had just weaponized against them. Donovan handed the envelope to me with a respectful nod. I held the worn paper up for William and Catherine to see. Before we finalize your current financial execution, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch, we have an outstanding ledger to balance. Let us go back to the morning of February 15th, 14 years ago. The exact morning after you threw me into the freezing snow with nothing but a thin sweatshirt. William swallowed audibly, his eyes fixed on the faded envelope. That is ancient history, he muttered defensively, his voice lacking any real conviction. We did what we had to do. You broke the rules of our house. You did not just enforce household rules, William III countered sharply. You committed blatant fiduciary fraud. I pulled a stack of heavily creased banking records from the envelope. These are the certified archival statements for a custodial education account set up by my late grandmother. An account that was strictly designated for my university tuition. On the morning of February 14th, the balance of this account was exactly $100,000. On the morning of February 15th, less than 12 hours after you locked me out of your house, the balance was zero. Catherine averted her gaze, staring intently at the floorboards. Brittany, who was still slumped on the floor, suddenly looked up. Her tear-streaked face registering a flicker of genuine confusion. You were a pregnant high school dropout, William argued, his face flushing red again as he scrambled for justification. You threw your education away. You were not going to college. You were going to be a teenage mother living on welfare. The money would have been completely wasted on you. As the custodian of that account, I made an executive decision to reallocate the capital to benefit the family. Reallocate the capital. I repeated, a cold laugh escaping my lips. That is a very sterile corporate term for robbing your own child to fund a vanity project. Let us look at the exact forensic paper trail of your reallocation. I flipped to the second page of the banking records, holding it out so he could see the highlighted lines of text. On February 15th at 9 o'clock in the morning, you walked into the local branch and executed a wire transfer. You moved $65,000 directly to a luxury European auto dealership in Fairfield County. I turned my gaze away from William and locked eyes with Brittany. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. 2 days later. Brittany, you drove a brand new white Porsche convertible onto your college campus. I stated my words, striking her like physical blows. You paraded around your sorority house, bragging about the lavish gift your wealthy parents bought to celebrate your freshman year. You parked that stolen car in front of your dorm while I was literally scrubbing floors at a diner to afford prenatal vitamins. Brittany scrambled to her feet, shaking her head frantically. I did not know, she cried out, her voice desperate and shrill. I swear to you, Lauren, I had absolutely no idea where the money came from. Dad told me it was a bonus from his firm. I thought it was a reward for getting into a good school. You are lying, I snapped, shutting down her pathetic attempt at innocence instantly. I have the emails, Brittany. You sent a message to Mom complaining that my college fund was just sitting there gathering dust while I was out ruining my life. You specifically suggested that since I was a lost cause, the money should go toward your elite status. You happily cannibalized my future to fund your fake wealthy aesthetic. You drove a car purchased with my stolen tuition money, and you loved every single second of it. Brittany clamped her hands over her mouth, but she could not formulate a denial. She knew I possessed the exact digital receipts. And what about the remaining $35,000, I asked, turning back to William and Catherine. I flipped to the third page of the bank statements. On February 18th, you moved the rest of the stolen capital into Catherine's personal checking account. Over the next 6 months, you systematically drained that stolen money to fund Brittany's expensive sorority dues, her spring break trip to Cabo San Lucas, and a brand new designer wardrobe so she could impress her wealthy friends. You literally stripped me of my only safety net, you left me completely destitute, and you spent the money on vacations and clothes. William gripped the edge of the marble table, his knuckles turning stark white. It was our money! He growled, a desperate, ugly snarl escaping his lips. We raised you. We fed you. You owed us for the shame you brought upon our name. We took what was rightfully ours as compensation. It was a custodial account legally protected under the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, one replied, reciting the legislation with effortless precision. You had a strict fiduciary duty to protect those assets for my benefit. What you did was embezzlement. Pure, malicious, calculated theft. You did not just kick me out, William. You actively sabotaged my ability to survive. You wanted me to fail. You wanted me to become the pathetic statistic you always predicted I would be, because it validated your twisted ego. If I failed, you could point at me and tell all your country club friends that you made the right decision by casting me out. I took a step closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look directly at the bank statements in my hand. But your plan backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Because stealing that $100,000 did not break me. It forged me. It taught me exactly how ruthless the world can be. And it taught me how to trace stolen money. I built my entire career on hunting down corporate thieves just like you. I spent the last decade tracking your every financial move, waiting for the exact perfect moment to collect my debt. Catherine let out a loud, dramatic sob, dropping to her knees on my imported hardwood floor. Please, Lauren, she wept, clasping her hands together in a pathetic display of begging. We were foolish. We were angry. We made a terrible mistake. But we are your parents. You cannot punish us forever for something that happened so long ago. I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical detachment. There is a statute of limitations on criminal embezzlement, I acknowledged, tapping the faded envelope against my palm. You are lucky that the criminal deadline passed while I was busy building my empire. But there is absolutely no expiration date on my memory, Catherine. You stole my foundation to build a golden pedestal for Brittany. And now I am going to show you exactly what happens when you build an entire life on stolen funds. I turned my head and gave Donovan another subtle nod. It was time to deploy the final catastrophic phase of the execution. The $100,000 theft was merely the prologue to the absolute financial annihilation I had prepared for them today. I held out my hand. Donovan reached into the depths of his briefcase one final time. He bypassed the standard folders and extracted a heavy leather-bound folio secured with a thick wax seal. He placed it directly into my waiting palm. The weight of the document was substantial, a physical manifestation of absolute legal authority. I tossed it onto the marble table right next to the flimsy paper William had proudly presented earlier. The heavy thud echoed sharply across the room. William stared at the leather folio, his chest heaving as a new wave of sheer terror washed over him. He looked from his document to mine, his mind frantically trying to process the catastrophic discrepancy. What is that? William demanded, his voice trembling uncontrollably. I already showed you the finalized will. We have the authentic notarized copies directly from his estate attorneys. We paid those attorneys a fortune to ensure the paperwork was airtight. You are bluffing, Lauren. You printed some fake paperwork to scare us into backing down. I am a corporate liquidator, William, I reminded him, my tone dropping to a chilling monotone. I do not bluff. I execute. That piece of paper you brought with you today, the one you thought was your golden ticket to financial salvation, is nothing but a decoy. It is a calculated piece of bait designed specifically to lure you into a federal trap. Catherine let out a sharp gasp, pulling herself up from the floor to stand shakily beside her husband. A decoy, she whispered, her eyes darting frantically between the two documents. That makes no sense. He signed it. We were there in the room when he signed it. The lawyers looked us in the eye and told us it was the final draft. They told you exactly what they were instructed to tell you, I countered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward them. You spent 14 years treating my grandfather like a senile piggy bank. You fed him outrageous lies about cartel kidnappings and tragic infant deaths. You drained his accounts to fund your country club memberships, assuming his grief made him blind and compliant. But grandfather was a retired appellate judge with a mind like a steel trap. His intellect was sharper at 90 than yours has ever been, William. He noticed the glaring inconsistencies in your extravagant private investigator invoices. He noticed the matching offshore accounts you used to hide his money. He realized the timeline of your fabricated rescue missions made absolutely zero logistical sense. So 3 years ago, he stopped trusting your fake reports and hired his own independent forensic team to uncover the truth. William swallowed hard, a massive bead of sweat tracing a line down his pale cheek. He hired investigators. William stammered, the color completely draining from his face. The best intelligence operatives money could buy. I confirmed, my voice slicing through his pathetic denial. It took them less than a month to locate me. They did not find me shivering in a cartel safe house in Mexico like your ridiculous story claimed. They found me sitting in a Manhattan boardroom closing a massive corporate acquisition. They found a highly successful woman managing her own wealth. And more importantly, they found my son alive, thriving, and attending a top-tier private academy. Grandfather did not just read the intelligence report, William. He came to the city to see the truth for himself. Brittany stumbled backward, crashing heavily into the glass window. He met you, she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure toxic envy. He knew you were here this whole time, living in this penthouse, and he never said a single word to us. He let us visit him every Sunday, pretending everything was fine. He met us exactly 2.5 years ago, I replied, holding her horrified gaze. We had dinner at a private restaurant downtown. He sat across from Leo and wept. He wept because he finally met his great-grandson, but he also wept because he realized the absolute depravity of his own son. He realized you had fabricated the death of an innocent infant just to extort an old man. He sat at that table, held my hand, and promised me he would ensure you never touched another dime of his legacy. He decided right then and there to orchestrate your ultimate downfall. I turned my attention back to William, pointing a manicured finger directly at his chest. You thought the bizarre stipulations in your version of the will were the paranoid ramblings of a dying man. You thought demanding a physical signature from a supposedly dead child was just a senile hurdle you could easily manipulate by forcing me into compliance today. You are a colossal fool, William. That document was a carefully constructed loyalty test and a lethal legal snare. Grandfather wanted to see exactly how far your greed would take you. He wanted to see if you would actually attempt to commit probate fraud by forcing a signature from a child you had previously declared dead. He wanted undeniable proof of your criminal intent. You brought that fake will into my home. I continued, my voice rising with unyielding authority. You explicitly stated your intention to use my son to unlock those funds for your own benefit. You actively engaged in a conspiracy to defraud an estate. Donovan has recorded this entire interaction for audit purposes. The high-definition security cameras in this penthouse have captured every single threat and demand you made since stepping off the elevator. You took the bait, William. You walked right into the steel jaws of a federal trap, and you dragged your wife and your golden child down with you. William stared at the heavy leather folio on the table, his entire body trembling as the realization of his catastrophic failure crushed the last remaining breath from his lungs. The real will, the master document residing inside that leather cover, completely supersedes your pathetic decoy, I declared, stepping closer to deliver the final lethal blow. Grandfather executed this master document completely off the grid, utilizing a separate elite legal team you knew absolutely nothing about. He deliberately revoked your status as designated guardians and entirely stripped you of your executor privileges. Catherine let out a piercing wail, burying her face in her trembling hands. "What does it say?" She sobbed uncontrollably, her knees buckling once again. "It says you get absolutely nothing," I answered, my voice colder than winter ice. "The real will bypasses you completely. It places the entire eight-figure estate, the liquid assets, the commercial real estate portfolios, the diverse stock holdings directly into a highly secured trust for Leo. And I am explicitly named as the sole unchallengeable executor of that entire financial empire. You have no legal access. You have no guardianship rights. You are entirely, legally, and financially severed from his legacy forever. You spent 14 years lying to him, stealing from him, and manipulating his grief to fund your fake suburban lifestyle. His final act on this earth was to ensure you would rot in the financial ruin of your own making. The silence in the room was absolute heavy with the crushing weight of their lost billions. But I was a corporate liquidator. I did not just cut off a failing company's future revenue streams. I dismantled their current assets until there was nothing left but dust. I turned away from the heavy leather folio containing my grandfather's true will and reached into the interior pocket of my own tailored suit jacket. I withdrew a single crisp white document. It was not a thick stack of complex legal jargon. It was a single page bearing a raised county seal and a highly official red stamp. I held the document up by the corner, letting the morning sunlight illuminate the heavy watermark. William stared at the paper, his eyes bloodshot and wide with raw terror. He had spent his entire life working in finance, but his gross incompetence had left him blind to the very mechanisms that were about to destroy him. Catherine pushed herself up from the floor, clutching the edge of the marble table, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Brittany remained frozen against the window, too traumatized by the loss of her counterfeit lifestyle to even comprehend that a second massive blow was coming. "We have established that you have no access to the estate," I said, my voice slicing through the quiet room with surgical precision. "We have established that your golden child is drowning in secret credit card debt and facing federal wire fraud charges. But we have not yet addressed the immediate logistical problem of where exactly you plan to sleep tonight." Catherine let out a confused whimper. "What are you talking about?" she choked out. "We are going home. We are going back to Connecticut." I dropped the crisp white document onto the marble table, letting it slide until it stopped right in front of William. "You do not have a home in Connecticut. Catherine?" I corrected my tone, completely devoid of mercy. "You have an oversized, heavily mortgaged liability that you stopped making payments on 5 months ago. You ignored the certified letters from the bank. You dodged the process servers. You thought you could stall the legal machinery of the state of Connecticut until you secured my son's signature today. You banked your entire residential security on a pathetic fraud scheme. But corporate debt does not wait for probate fraud to clear." I tapped the raised seal on the paper. When a commercial bank decides a residential mortgage has become a non-performing asset, they bundle that toxic debt and sell it at a steep discount to corporate liquidation firms. They want it off their books immediately. 2 weeks ago, my firm Apex Resolution Partners purchased a portfolio of distressed debt from your specific lender. I personally oversaw the acquisition. I bought the paper on your pristine 4-bedroom suburban fortress for pennies on the dollar. William physically recoiled as if the piece of paper on the table had suddenly caught fire. "You bought our mortgage," he whispered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wheeze. "You own our debt." "I do not own your debt, William," I corrected, shifting my weight and looking down at him with absolute authority. "I own your house. I am the sole proprietor of the holding company that now holds the deed. And unlike your previous highly tolerant bank, I do not offer grace periods or loan modifications to delinquent debtors. I execute the maximum legal penalty immediately without exception." I checked the slim gold watch on my wrist. "It is currently 11:45 in the morning. At exactly 9 o'clock today, while you are sitting in traffic on the interstate, excitedly planning how to extort your teenage grandson, my legal team finalized the foreclosure proceedings at the county courthouse. The judge signed the final eviction order." I glanced at Donovan, who gave a short confirming nod. "My auditing team verified the transfer of the deed at exactly 9:03 this morning." Donovan added, his voice smooth and merciless. "The asset is entirely secured under Apex Resolution Partners. You are currently trespassing on corporate property if you even attempt to step foot on that driveway. Catherine let out a blood-curdling shriek. No! She screamed, lunging forward and grabbing the document from the table. Her eyes darted wildly across the legal text, searching desperately for a loophole that did not exist. This cannot be real. You cannot just take our home. Our clothes are in there, our furniture, everything we own is in that house. I took a step closer, ensuring she heard every single word of her impending reality. Not anymore, Catherine. At 9:30 this morning, the county sheriff arrived at your front door. I made sure to schedule the execution on a weekday morning when all of your prestigious country club neighbors would be outside walking their purebred dogs and heading to their tennis matches. The head of your homeowner association watched the entire spectacle. They all stood on the sidewalk and watched as the sheriff posted the bright neon orange eviction notice right on your freshly painted front door. I let the image of her ultimate social nightmare sink into her brain. Catherine cared about nothing more than her status among the wealthy suburban elite. I had just orchestrated the most public, humiliating destruction of her social standing imaginable. Your entire social circle now knows you are entirely bankrupt, I stated. After the sheriff cleared the property, my private security contractors moved in. I continued delivering the final unyielding blow. They changed every single lock on the exterior doors. They reprogrammed the garage keypad. They disabled your smart home access. They took a full inventory of the physical assets inside the property to offset the massive capital deficit you owe my firm. Your designer clothes, your expensive china, your carefully curated art collection, it all belongs to my holding company now. William fell to his knees. The pompous, arrogant patriarch who had violently thrown my belongings into the freezing snow 14 years ago was now kneeling on my floor, completely broken. His hands shook violently as he reached out, trying to touch the hem of my tailored trousers. I stepped back, disgusted by his sudden submission. He had only ever respected power, and now that I held all of it, he was reduced to a groveling shell. "You cannot do this," he begged, tears finally spilling from his eyes and hitting the hardwood floor. "You are leaving us on the street. We have nowhere to go. We have no money. We do not even have a change of clothes. You are making us homeless." I looked down at him, feeling the exact same icy chill that had permeated my bones on that February night over a decade ago. But this time the cold was coming from inside me. "I am simply returning the favor, William," I stated, my voice echoing with devastating finality. "I am giving you the exact same grace, the exact same warmth, and the exact same financial support you gave a pregnant teenager in the middle of a blizzard. I am liquidating your life." The words struck the marble floor like heavy iron chains, locking them into their new desolate reality. The sheer finality of the statement shattered the fragile illusion of familial loyalty that had kept them bound together. In the absence of my grandfather and his massive fortune, and with the sudden evaporation of their suburban estate, the toxic glue holding William, Catherine, and Brittany together completely dissolved. I watched with clinical fascination as the perfectly curated family instantly turned into a pit of starving vipers. Brittany was the first to strike. She pushed herself away from the glass window, her eyes wild with a feral panic. She kicked the shredded remains of her counterfeit handbag out of her way and lunged toward her kneeling father. "You lied to me!" Brittany screamed, her voice tearing through the penthouse. Her manicured hands curled into claws as she stood over him. "You told me you were wealthy. You told me the mortgage was just a temporary restructuring. You dragged me up to this apartment and promised me a massive inheritance if I just helped you intimidate Lauren. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of my own husband. You dragged me into a federal crime, William." William scrambled backward on the floor, trying to put distance between himself and his furious golden child. "Do not you dare speak to me that way," he bellowed, his face twisting into an ugly, defensive sneer. "We financed your entire pathetic existence. We paid for your luxury vacations and your designer wardrobe while we were drowning in debt. You drained us dry, Brittany. You demanded the lifestyle of a millionaire and we went bankrupt trying to provide it for you. You are just as responsible for this collapse as anyone else." Catherine interjected, inserting herself between her husband and her daughter. She shoved William by his shoulder, her own face contorted with pure venom. "This is your fault, William," she shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. "You were the one who made those idiotic investments in commercial real estate. You were the one who insisted we maintain the country club membership, even after your firm let you go. I told you we needed to downsize, but you refused to give up your pathetic pride. You ruined us. You lost my home. You lost my social standing. I have absolutely nothing because of your colossal arrogance." "I am arrogant," William roared back, struggling to his feet so he could shout directly into his wife's face. "You spent $5,000 a month on cosmetic procedures and private chefs while the bank was mailing us foreclosure warnings. You refused to stop hosting those lavish dinner parties. You chose to live in a delusional fantasy, and you forced me to keep borrowing money to fund it. Do not you dare put this entirely on me, Catherine." The three of them devolved into a chaotic screaming match. They hurled vicious accusations, pointing fingers and exposing decades of financial infidelity and deeply rooted resentments. Brittany screamed about William taking out secondary loans using her social security number when she was in college. Catherine screamed about Brittany draining their emergency funds for a destination wedding they could not afford. They ripped each other apart in the middle of my living room, entirely forgetting that my son and I were even standing there. They weaponized every secret, every failed investment, and every desperate loan they had ever taken. It was a spectacular implosion. The Golden family was eating itself alive. Brittany spun around her chest, heaving as she realized that screaming at her bankrupt parents would not magically restore her stolen credit lines. Her panicked eyes darted around the room and landed entirely on Donovan. He was standing quietly by the marble table, his hands resting near his leather briefcase. In her desperate mind, he was her absolute last resort. He was a highly compensated audit director. He had liquid capital. He had pristine credit. "Donovan," she gasped, her voice suddenly softening into a pathetic, pleading whine. She rushed toward him, reaching out to grab the lapels of his expensive tailored suit. "Donovan, please, you have to help us. You have to get us out of here. Book us a suite at a hotel downtown, call your bank and authorize a wire transfer so we can hire a defense attorney. We need to fight this. You have the resources to fix this nightmare. Please save me." Donovan did not flinch. He did not step away. He simply looked down at her hands, clutching his jacket. He reached up and meticulously peeled her fingers off his lapels, one by one, dropping her hands back to her sides with absolute physical rejection. He did not raise his voice. He did not match her frantic energy. He maintained the exact same chilling professionalism he had utilized since stepping off the elevator. "I am an auditor," Brittany Donovan stated, his voice cutting cleanly through the lingering echoes of their screaming match. "I identify toxic assets and I neutralize them to protect the primary portfolio. I do not rescue failing entities, I liquidate them." He turned back to his open briefcase. He reached past the thick black folio containing my family financial ruin and withdrew a single crisp, manila envelope. He turned back to Brittany and pressed the envelope firmly against her chest, forcing her to take it. Brittany stared at the envelope, her hands shaking violently as she gripped the paper edges. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely functioning. "Those are your divorce papers," Donovan announced, delivering the final lethal blow to her parasitic existence. "My legal team filed them at the county courthouse at exactly 9 o'clock this morning in perfect coordination with Lauren executing the foreclosure on your parents. I wanted to ensure that the total liquidation of this family happened simultaneously." Brittany let out a choked, agonizing gasp. She stumbled backward, clutching the divorce papers as if they were burning her hands. "No, Donovan, please," she sobbed, shaking her head frantically. "You cannot do this. We are married. We are a team. We can fix this together." "We were a host and a parasite," Donovan corrected coldly. "And the host has officially severed the connection. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I executed an emergency freeze on all of our joint financial accounts. I revoked your access to my secondary credit lines. I canceled the supplemental cards you have been using to fund your fraudulent lifestyle. The strict parameters of our prenuptial agreement have been fully activated, shielding all of my primary assets from your insolvency. The locks on our primary residence were changed an hour ago by private security. Your personal belongings have been boxed up and moved to a self-storage facility. The first month rent is paid. After that, it is entirely your problem. You have absolutely zero access to my capital. You are entirely on your own. Brittany collapsed into the armchair, weeping with a ferocity that shook her entire body. William and Catherine stood frozen, watching their last remaining lifeline evaporate into thin air. Their wealthy, successful son-in-law had just financially executed their golden child right in front of their eyes. Donovan buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous care. He did not spare his weeping wife another glance. He turned his back on the chaotic, sobbing wreckage of the family he had endured for 5 years. He walked across the imported hardwood floor, his footsteps echoing with absolute authority, and took his place firmly behind Lauren and Leo. He stood tall, his hands clasped behind his back, forming an impenetrable wall of professional and personal alliance with the only two people in the room who actually understood the true value of loyalty. The visual shift in power was absolute. The toxic family was completely isolated on one side of the room, broken, bankrupt, and weeping, while we stood united, untouchable, and entirely victorious on the other. Stripped of their heavily mortgaged estate, their counterfeit luxury goods, and their stolen inheritance, the toxic trio completely fell apart. The realization that they possessed absolutely zero leverage finally penetrated their thick skulls. There were no more threats to issue. There were no more trust fund clauses to weaponize. They had nothing left but the sheer terrifying reality of their immediate homelessness. William was the first to physically break. The man who had spent my entire life projecting an image of untouchable corporate authority suddenly sagged forward. His knees hit the imported hardwood floor with a heavy, dull thud. He did not try to stand back up. He simply knelt there, his expensive suit pants gathering dust, his head bowed in absolute defeat. Catherine immediately followed her husband to the floor. She dropped to her knees beside him, her carefully styled hair falling in messy strands across her tear-stained face. She crawled forward on the polished wood, closing the physical distance between us until she was looking up at me from the ground. It was a pathetic, grotesque display of submission. They had spent 14 years demanding that I bow to their authority, and now they were groveling at the feet of the exact same daughter they had violently discarded. "Lauren, please!" Catherine begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "You cannot do this to us. We are your family. We are your own flesh and blood. You cannot just throw your own parents out onto the street. We will freeze. We will starve. We have absolutely nowhere to go. Please, Lauren, you have to forgive us. You have to find it in your heart to grant us mercy." William looked up, his eyes red and swollen with desperate tears. He reached out an empty, trembling hand toward my custom Italian heels. "We made terrible mistakes, Lauren," he sobbed, his voice thick with panic. "I was a foolish, arrogant man. I let the pressure of our financial situation turn me into a monster. But you are my daughter. Blood is thicker than water. We share the same genetics. You cannot look at your own father kneeling on the floor and condemn him to die in the gutter. Families forgive each other, Lauren. That is what families do. Please just cancel the foreclosure. Just give us a fraction of the trust fund so we can survive. We are begging you." Brittany dragged herself across the floor, abandoning her shredded counterfeit handbag to join her parents in their pathetic display. She clutched her divorce papers to her chest, weeping hysterically. "Lauren, you are my sister," Brittany pleaded, her voice raw and desperate. "We grew up together. We shared a childhood. You know I was just following Mom and Dad orders. I was terrified of losing their approval. Please do not let Donovan do this to me. Tell him to cancel the divorce. Tell him to unlock my accounts. You have all the power now, Lauren. You won. You proved your point. Please just show us some compassion." They weaponized the concept of family with desperate, calculated precision. They threw words like blood and forgiveness and mercy across the room, hoping to strike a nerve, hoping to find a lingering trace of the terrified 18-year-old girl who used to desperately crave their love. They painted a horrific picture of themselves dying on the freezing city streets, attempting to guilt-trip me into surrendering my capital to save their pathetic lives. I stood perfectly still. I did not step away from their reaching hands, but I did not lean down to comfort them either. I looked at the three people kneeling on my floor and I felt absolutely nothing. There was no lingering anger, no sudden rush of sympathy, and certainly no guilt. I felt a chilling, absolute apathy. I glanced down at my son. Leo was watching his biological grandparents weep on the floor with the exact same clinical detachment. He looked completely unaffected by their theatrical display of misery. He analyzed their sobbing the way a scientist observes a predictable chemical reaction. I slowly lowered myself into a crouch, bringing my face level with William and Catherine. Their eyes widened with a sudden spark of hope, mistakenly believing my proximity signaled a willingness to negotiate. I shattered that hope instantly. "Do not ever weaponize the concept of blood against me," I stated, my voice dropping to a lethally calm whisper. "Let us forensically dissect this pathetic apology you just attempted to construct. You are not crying because you feel genuine remorse for your actions. You are not kneeling on my floor because you suddenly developed a moral conscience after 14 years of sustained abuse. You are crying because your bank accounts are empty and your access to luxury has been permanently revoked. You are groveling because you are terrified of the immediate physical discomfort of poverty." I locked my eyes onto Catherine, watching her tremble under my freezing gaze. "You say families forgive each other, Catherine." I continued, my words striking her like physical blows. "Where was that philosophy on the night of February 14th? Where was your maternal mercy when I was knocking on your heavy oak door begging for a blanket while the temperature dropped below freezing? You did not care about blood when you watched me standing in the snow. You cared about your reputation at the local country club. You chose your social status over the life of your own pregnant child." I shifted my attention to William, who was violently shaking. "You claim the financial pressure turned you into a monster, William," I said, dismissing his excuse with pure disgust. "Financial pressure does not force a grown man to violently drag his daughter by her hair. Financial pressure does not force you to steal a $100,000 education fund to buy a sports car for your golden child. You were always a monster, William. The bankruptcy just removed the expensive suit hiding your true nature. You spent an entire decade defrauding a grieving old man to fund your vanity. You fabricated the death of an infant to extract private investigator fees. You have absolutely no moral high ground to stand on." I finally turned to Brittany, who was hyperventilating, clutching her useless divorce documents. "And you, Brittany," I noted sharply, "you were not just following orders. You actively, enthusiastically participated in my destruction because it guaranteed your position as the favorite child. You happily drove a luxury vehicle funded by my stolen tuition. You gleefully marched into my penthouse today, threatening to call Child Protective Services to have my son taken away from me. You tried to weaponize the foster care system against a child just so you could steal his inheritance. Do not you dare beg for sisterly compassion after attempting to destroy my family." I stood back up, rising to my full height and looking down at the broken, weeping trio. "You want me to act like family?" I asked, my voice echoing with devastating finality. "I am acting exactly like the family you raised me to be. You taught me that compassion is a weakness. You taught me that financial leverage is the only thing that commands respect. You taught me to liquidate liabilities before they drag down the primary portfolio. You three are the ultimate toxic liability. I am not going to cancel the foreclosure. I am not going to give you a single cent of my grandfather trust. You are going to walk out of this building with nothing but the clothes on your backs, and you are going to face the exact same freezing reality you forced upon me." I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not break eye contact with the weeping figures on my floor as my thumb hovered over the screen. I opened the private security application integrated into the building infrastructure. With a single decisive tap, I activated the protocol for a hostile removal. The digital command triggered a silent alarm directly to the primary security desk, located 40 floors below us. My final verdict was absolute. "Your time in my home is officially over," I declared, my voice ringing with a chilling authority that left absolutely no room for negotiation. You came up here seeking an easy target and a massive payday. Instead, you found your total financial execution. You are no longer my parents. You are no longer my sister. In the eyes of the law and in the eyes of my holding company, you are simply unauthorized trespassers occupying private property. William let out a guttural cry of pure desperation. He attempted to scramble forward, reaching his shaking hands toward my ankles in a final, pathetic bid for mercy. "Lauren, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. "You cannot do this. We will do anything. We will sign whatever you want. We will publicly apologize. Just give us a fraction of the trust. Just give us enough to secure a small apartment." I took a deliberate step backward, avoiding his grasp entirely. "I do not negotiate with bankrupt entities," William I replied, staring down at him with an expression of pure stone. "You have absolutely zero leverage and zero capital to offer. Your apologies are as worthless as your credit score." The heavy steel doors of the private elevator chimed. They slid open with a sharp mechanical hiss, revealing a team of 4 highly trained security contractors. They were dressed in immaculate dark suits, moving with the synchronized precision of a tactical unit. They stepped into the penthouse, their faces completely devoid of any emotion. They had been thoroughly briefed on the situation and knew exactly who they were removing. "Gentlemen," I said, addressing the lead contractor without ever taking my eyes off the toxic trio. "These 3 individuals are trespassing. They have been informed that their presence is no longer welcome. Please escort them off the premises immediately and ensure they are permanently banned from entering this building ever again." The security contractors moved forward with breathtaking efficiency. 2 of them flanked William, grabbing him firmly by his upper arms and hoisting him off the hardwood floor. He thrashed wildly, kicking his expensive leather shoes against the marble, trying desperately to break free. "Do you know who I am?" William screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I will sue this entire building. I will have your badges. Unhand me immediately." The guards ignored his empty threats completely, lifting him effortlessly toward the open elevator. Catherine let out a piercing, horrific shriek as a third contractor firmly grasped her elbow and pulled her to her feet. "No," she wailed, thrashing her arms and twisting her body in a desperate attempt to stay anchored to the floor. "Lauren, tell them to stop. Tell them to let us go. You are my daughter. You are my flesh and blood. Please do not throw us out like garbage." "You threw me out like garbage 14 years ago, Catherine," I reminded her, my voice slicing through her hysterical screams. "Consider this your long overdue karmic return." The fourth contractor approached Brittany. She was still clutching the divorce papers Donovan had handed her, sobbing so violently she was practically choking on her own breath. She tried to cling to the base of the floor-to-ceiling window, her fingernails scraping desperately against the glass. "Donovan," she begged, looking frantically at her soon-to-be ex-husband, "please do not let them do this. I am your wife. We can fix this." Donovan stood perfectly still, his posture radiating absolute authority and unyielding rejection. "We are nothing, Brittany," he stated, his voice echoing with devastating finality. "My legal team will contact you regarding the asset division. Do not ever attempt to contact me again." The guard firmly gripped Brittany by her designer coat, pulling her away from the window. She kicked and screamed, her expensive heels scratching against the wood, leaving pathetic little marks of her forced departure. The 3 of them were dragged backward into the spacious elevator cabin. Their screams echoed off the high ceilings, a chaotic symphony of pure panic, desperation, and profound loss. William was shouting obscenities. Catherine was wailing my name. Brittany was hyperventilating, clutching her divorce papers like a lifeline. I stood shoulder to shoulder with my son and my most valued audit director. We watched the chaotic scene unfold with absolute chilling apathy. The security contractors stepped back into the elevator cabin, securing their grip on the thrashing trespassers. The lead contractor met my gaze and gave a single respectful nod. The heavy steel elevator doors began to slide shut. The mechanical mechanism hummed smoothly, slowly closing the gap. I watched my parents and my sister fighting against the inevitable, their faces contorted in absolute terror as they realized there was no escape from their new destitute reality. The doors snapped together with a solid, definitive click. The sealing mechanism locked. The screaming was instantly cut off. Complete and utter silence fell over the $4 million penthouse. The sudden quiet was jarring but incredibly beautiful. The toxic, heavy energy that had suffocated the room just moments ago completely evaporated. The air felt clean, fresh, and entirely mine. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling a massive, invisible weight physically lift off my shoulders. 14 years of lingering trauma, 14 years of wondering if I was ever enough, finally dissolved into nothingness. I turned to look at Leo. My 14-year-old son was casually adjusting his crimson uniform tie. He looked up at me, a sharp, intelligent spark dancing in his dark eyes. He offered a small, proud smile. The financial execution was flawless. Mother Leo stated, his voice calm and steady. Their liabilities have been completely liquidated. I returned his smile, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Yes, they have, Leo. You executed your data analysis perfectly. I am incredibly proud of you. Donovan unbuttoned his suit jacket, rolling his shoulders backward, as if shedding the heavy burden of his toxic marriage. He walked over to the marble table, picked up his premium leather briefcase, and snapped the brass locks shut. He looked around the pristine penthouse, and then turned his observant gaze to me. It has been a pleasure doing business with you, Lauren. Donovan said, a genuine sense of relief coloring his voice. The audit is officially closed. We walked together toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun was climbing higher in the sky, casting a brilliant golden light over the sprawling Manhattan skyline. The city stretched out before us, a vast landscape of endless opportunity and cutthroat corporate strategy. We stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out over the empire I had built from absolute scratch. We shared a quiet, victorious moment, a silent acknowledgement of the brutal but necessary war we had just won. I looked down at the bustling city streets far below, knowing that somewhere down there, 3 bankrupt, broken people were being violently ejected onto the cold pavement. I felt no pity. I felt only the supreme satisfaction of absolute justice. I turned away from the window and looked directly forward, ready to claim the rest of my life. Blood does not give anyone the right to destroy you. Sometimes you have to be the one who liquidates the toxic assets in your life. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe. The chilling yet triumphant story of Lauren offers a profound lesson on the illusion of familial obligation. Society often dictates that we must forgive our blood relatives unconditionally, demanding that we constantly tolerate abuse in the name of blind loyalty. However, this narrative completely shatters that dangerous myth, teaching us that shared DNA does not grant anyone a free pass to exploit, demean, or destroy you. The ultimate lesson here is that true empowerment requires the courage to enforce absolute boundaries and unapologetically sever ties with toxicity. For 14 years, Lauren was treated as a disposable liability, violently discarded when she no longer fit her parents' pristine suburban facade. Instead of letting that profound betrayal break her, she channeled her trauma into building an impenetrable financial empire. Her journey perfectly demonstrates that our lowest, most desperate moments can become the solid foundation of our greatest strength. When her family eventually returned, driven purely by greed and impending ruin, they desperately attempted to weaponize guilt. Yet Lauren's clinical detachment proves that healing is not always about warm reconciliation. Sometimes true healing is about recognizing your own monumental worth and refusing to negotiate with emotional terrorists. She did not just barely survive her childhood trauma. She expertly audited it permanently, liquidated the emotional debt, and gracefully evicted the abusers from her life. Ultimately, we are the CEOs of our own lives, holding the absolute authority to decide who gets a seat at our table and who is escorted off the premises. We must stop romanticizing toxic relationships and start protecting our peace with the exact same ruthless precision we would apply to a failing enterprise. Take a careful inventory of the toxic relationships draining your energy today and bravely dare to evict the toxicity from your life before it bankrupts your soul.